Every time we visited my wealthy in-laws for dinner, I somehow ended up passed out in the passenger seat of my husband's car. I would wake up dizzy, my silk blouse buttoned completely wrong, my lipstick smeared aggressively across my chin. My husband Donovan would just chuckle, blaming my low alcohol tolerance. I believed his sweet lies the first 2 times. But the third time it happened, my professional instincts kicked in. The stealth audio recording I captured on my smartwatch that night revealed a family conspiracy so predatory it shattered my entire reality. My name is Kelsey, and I am 30 years old. I make my living as a forensic financial auditor in Chicago, which means I spend my days tracking missing money, exposing corporate fraud, and securing decentralized digital assets. In my line of work, I am paid to notice the small discrepancies that other people miss. I woke up to the rhythmic hum of tires on asphalt and a pounding headache that felt like a heavy fog pressing against my skull. My mouth tasted like dry cotton. I blinked against the harsh glare of passing streetlights, disoriented and struggling to sit up in the passenger seat of Donovan's luxury sedan. "Hey there, sleepyhead." Donovan's smooth, charismatic voice broke through the silence. He kept his eyes on the road, one hand casually resting on the steering wheel. "You really crashed hard tonight, babe." I groaned, reaching up to rub my aching temples. As my hand brushed against my chest, my fingers snagged on the fabric of my clothes. I looked down, my vision swimming slightly before snapping into sharp focus. My emerald green silk blouse was completely misbuttoned. The fabric was pulled askew, exposing my collarbone and the top edge of my bra. Panic flared in my chest. I quickly pulled down the passenger sun visor and flipped open the illuminated mirror. The reflection staring back at me was a mess. My dark hair was tangled and my expensive red lipstick was smeared in a thick, jagged line down the side of my chin, making me look like a sloppy, out-of-control drunk. "What happened to me?" I asked frantically, trying to fix the buttons on my shirt. Donovan let out a rich, easy laugh. It was the same charming laugh that made him so successful as a wealth manager. "You had one glass of Beatrice's Reserve Cabernet and completely tapped out. You started complaining about how hot it was in the dining room and clumsily ripped your own buttons open before passing out on the sofa. I had to practically carry you to the car." I stopped buttoning my shirt and stared at his handsome profile in the dim light of the dashboard. Donovan came from a prominent African-American family in Chicago. His mother, Beatrice, was a high society matriarch obsessed with appearances, and his father, Winston, was a retired executive who always seemed to be hosting lavish events. They constantly judged my practical, unflashy lifestyle. To them, I was just Donovan's plain working-class wife, who did not know how to handle high-end liquor or appreciate luxury. But I knew my own body. I knew my tolerance. One glass of wine does not cause a grown woman to black out, lose control of her motor functions, and wake up with a splitting chemical headache. More importantly, this was the third time this exact scenario had played out this month. 3 dinners at Beatrice and Winston's massive estate. 3 single glasses of wine handed directly to me by my husband. 3 inexplicable blackouts resulting in me waking up disheveled in the passenger seat of his car. "I am just a lightweight, I guess," I murmured, forcing a weak smile. I leaned my head against the cold glass of the window, pretending to close my eyes and drift back to sleep. In reality, my heart was hammering violently against my ribs. I was not a lightweight. I was a highly trained auditor, and my brain was rapidly compiling the data points of this horrifying pattern. If I did not unbutton my own shirt, someone else did. The thought made my skin crawl. Why would Donovan or anyone in his image-obsessed family do this to me? Then I felt the familiar weight of the silver chain resting against my collarbone. Hidden beneath my clothes was a highly encrypted biometric hardware wallet. It contained a $12 million digital trust left to me by my late mentor. Nobody in Donovan's family knew about the money. They all thought I was just a basic numbers girl scraping by on a standard salary. I had kept the wealth a secret because I valued my modest life and wanted to ensure Donovan loved me for me, not for a massive bank account. My mind raced. Could they know about the money? Was that even possible? As I lay there feigning sleep, A sudden memory pierced through the chemical fog in my brain. Earlier that evening, before dinner was served, Donovan's younger sister Simone had been picking at me. Simone was the golden child of the family, a self-proclaimed tech entrepreneur, married to a slick crypto investor named Kendrick. Simone had cornered me in the hallway, making passive-aggressive remarks about my inexpensive shoes and bragging about her own luxury startup. I had been so annoyed by her relentless bullying that I subtly activated the stealth audio recorder on my smartwatch. I had planned to play the audio back for Donovan later to prove exactly how toxic his sister was behind his back. I slowly cracked one eye open and glanced down at my wrist. The tiny red indicator light on the watch face was completely dark, but the screen confirmed the device had stored a new audio file. It had been recording for over 2 hours. It recorded everything that happened while I was unconscious in my mother-in-law's house. Donovan hummed along to the jazz playing on the car radio, completely relaxed, utterly convinced that his naive wife was sleeping off a wine buzz. He reached over and gently patted my knee. "We are almost home, sweetheart," he said warmly. "Just rest." I kept my eyes shut and my breathing even, playing the role of the helpless, trusting wife perfectly. But beneath the surface, the forensic auditor was fully awake. I did not know exactly what they had done to me yet, but I knew I had the evidence locked on my wrist. I was going to listen to that recording, and if my instincts were right, I was going to tear Donovan's perfect world apart piece by piece. The moment Donovan parked in the driveway of our townhouse, he killed the engine and walked around to open my door. I kept up the charade, stumbling intentionally as he guided me up the front steps. He wrapped one strong arm around my waist, his touch feeling entirely different now. What used to feel like a protective embrace now felt like a predator guiding its prey into a cage. He unlocked the front door, maneuvered me inside, and kissed the top of my head. He told me to go wash up while he poured himself a nightcap. I mumbled a convincing, sluggish agreement and dragged my feet up the stairs. The second I crossed the threshold of our master bathroom, my entire demeanor shifted. I quietly shut the solid oak door, turned the deadbolt with a soft click, and immediately turned on the shower faucet. The rush of hot water hitting the tile would muffle any noise I made. I sank onto the edge of the cold porcelain bathtub, my hands trembling as I unclasped my smartwatch. I navigated to the hidden audio folder. My thumb hovered over the play button. A part of me, the part that still loved my husband, desperately hoped I was just being paranoid. I pressed play anyway. The recording started with the ambient noise of Beatrice's lavish dining room. I heard the clinking of crystal glasses, the soft hum of jazz music, and my own voice sounding perfectly normal as I complimented Winston on the roast. Then the audio captured Donovan pouring the wine. I heard him hand me the glass. 10 minutes later, on the recording, my voice began to slur. I heard myself say I felt lightheaded, followed by the heavy, sickening thud of my body collapsing against the leather sofa. Then the silence in the recording was broken. It was not the panicked voices of a family worried about their daughter-in-law. It was a chorus of cold, calculated whispers. "Is she completely out?" That was Simone. Her voice dripped with an icy arrogance that made my blood run cold. She sounded nothing like the sweet, supportive sister-in-law she pretended to be when Donovan was around. "She is out," Donovan replied. His voice was entirely devoid of emotion. He did not sound like the man who had vowed to protect me. He sounded like a technician executing a routine task. "Get her shirt open, Simone. We need to access the chain." I heard the rustle of fabric on the audio. Then Simone sneered. "I cannot stand touching her. Look at this stitching. I am unbuttoning this cheap blouse, and it feels like it came from a discount rack. Why does she dress like a peasant when she is sitting on $12 million, say?" I stopped breathing. The bathroom around me seemed to spin. $12 million, they knew. My lungs tightened as the audio continued playing. I had taken extreme measures to mask my digital trust. As a forensic financial auditor, hiding decentralized assets was my specialty. I lived below my means, drove a practical car, and wore modest clothes to ensure my wealth remained invisible. But somehow Donovan had discovered the truth. My entire marriage, every romantic gesture, every shared dream had been a long con. Hurry up and find the hardware wallet. That was Beatrice. The matriarch of the family spoke with a sharp, commanding authority. Winston is keeping the staff busy in the kitchen, but we do not have all night. Kendrick has the bypass terminal ready on his laptop. Just get her thumb. I pulled my knees to my chest as the recording played the sound of my husband maneuvering my limp body. I felt a phantom touch on my collarbone as I listened. I have the wallet, Donovan said. The chain was tucked under her bra strap. Pull her right arm over here. I need her thumb flat against the biometric scanner. Hold her wrist steady, Simone. There was a tense pause on the recording. I could picture Kendrick Simone's grifter of a husband sitting there with a decrypted terminal waiting for the signal. Then Donovan cursed under his breath. It rejected the master transfer, Donovan hissed. The security protocol is kicking back an error code. What do you mean it rejected it? Beatrice demanded, her voice rising in panic. Kendrick said we just needed the biometric authorization to drain the accounts. Donovan let out a frustrated sigh. Kendrick misread the encryption parameters. Look at the prompt on the screen. The master transfer protocol requires a 30-day continuous ping from her verified home network before the final biometric approval will release the funds. We triggered the initial authorization tonight, but the money is locked for 30 days. We are going to have to do this all over again next month to get the final scan. Simone groaned loudly. You mean I have to pretend to tolerate this basic, boring woman for another 30 days? My startup is bleeding cash, Donovan. The feds are already sniffing around Kendrick's shell companies. We need that $12 million now. You will get it, Donovan snapped. We just have to stick to the timeline. We will bring her back for the anniversary gala next month. I will dose her drink again, we get the final thumbprint, and the money vanishes into Kendrick's offshore accounts. She will wake up, log in, and think she was hacked by a third party. Now back away from her. I sat on the edge of my bathtub, the hot steam from the shower filling the room, soaking my clothes, but I felt ice cold. My husband was not just cheating on me or lying to me. He was actively coordinating a multi-million-dollar heist with his entire family. They viewed me as nothing more than a human vault to be cracked and discarded. Make sure she looks a mess before she wakes up. Beatrice's voice cut through the audio, once more vicious and calculating. Smear her lipstick. Pull her shirt crooked. Make her look like the sloppy drunk she is. If she asks questions tomorrow, remind her she cannot handle her liquor. Gaslight her until she doubts her own memory. The recording captured the sound of fabric tearing slightly as Simone yanked at my blouse. I heard Donovan chuckle, the exact same chuckle he had just used in the car. The file ended with the heavy silence of my own unconscious breathing. I lowered my wrist. The sound of the running shower filled the bathroom, masking the quiet, ragged breath that escaped my lips. The tears that pricked my eyes were not born of heartbreak. They were born of absolute, unadulterated rage. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to mourn the man I thought I had married. I let the illusion of my perfect life die right there on the bathroom tiles. Then the grieving stopped. The vulnerable, betrayed wife vanished, and the forensic financial auditor took over. They thought I was just a naive, cheap woman who had stumbled into a fortune. They thought they could drug me, violate my physical autonomy, and steal the legacy my mentor had entrusted to me. They had underestimated exactly what kind of professional they had brought into their home. I stood up, staring at my reflection in the fogged mirror. I reached out and wiped the condensation away. I wiped the smeared lipstick off my chin, buttoned my emerald silk blouse to the very top, and smoothed my hair. I was not going to confront them. I was not going to scream or demand a divorce. I was going to give them exactly what they wanted. I would wait for their 30-day timeline. I would let them think their master transfer protocol was working flawlessly. I would smile, I would play the lightweight wife, and I would build a digital trap so devastating it would not just stop their theft, it would send every single one of them to federal prison. I turned off the shower, unlocked the bathroom door, and stepped out to face my husband. I stepped out of the bathroom wrapped in a plush towel. Donovan was already asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady, peaceful rhythm. Looking at his handsome face, resting against the white pillows, a wave of nausea washed over me. This was the man who had held my hair when I had the flu. The man who had surprised me with weekend getaways. The man who had just coordinated a $12 million heist against me with his entire family. I forced myself to walk to my side of the bed, slide under the covers, and lie perfectly still until the sun came up. Morning arrived with the scent of freshly brewed espresso and sizzling butter. Before I discovered the recording, waking up to Donovan making breakfast was my favorite part of the weekend. Now the smell just made my stomach churn. I put on a pair of comfortable sweatpants and an oversized college sweatshirt, deliberately styling my hair into a messy bun. I needed to look like a woman nursing a severe wine hangover. I walked down the stairs, making sure my footsteps were heavy and sluggish. Donovan was at the stove, flipping eggs in a copper pan. He wore his tailored suit trousers and a crisp white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He looked like the picture-perfect successful wealth manager getting ready for another day of moving millions. When he heard me enter the kitchen, he turned around with a bright, dazzling smile. "Good morning, gorgeous." He set the spatula down and walked over to me, wrapping his strong arms around my waist. He kissed my forehead, his lips warm against my skin. "How is that head feeling today?" I had to lock every single muscle in my body to keep from shoving him away. I let out a dramatic, breathy groan and leaned into his solid chest, resting my cheek against his shoulder. My head is absolutely pounding. I cannot believe I passed out like that. I am so embarrassed, Donovan. What must your mother think of me? Donovan chuckled, rubbing my back soothingly. "Oh, do not worry about Beatrice. You know how she is. She thinks anyone who cannot handle a heavy pour of vintage Cabernet lacks refinement. But I told her, you have just been working crazy hours at the firm. You were exhausted, babe. Next time, we will make sure you stick to sparkling water." "You are the best husband," I murmured, forcing the lie through my teeth. I pulled away and slumped into a bar stool at the kitchen island. Donovan plated the eggs, added a slice of perfectly toasted sourdough, and set the meal in front of me, along with a steaming mug of black coffee. He sat across from me, sipping his own coffee, his dark eyes watching me with absolute adoration. It was a terrifying performance. He was a sociopath hiding behind a megawatt smile. I forced myself to eat the eggs, chewing methodically, while making mundane conversation about my upcoming workload. I complained about having to review endless compliance spreadsheets, playing up my role as the exhausted, boring numbers girl. Donovan listened attentively, offering words of encouragement, completely unaware that the woman sitting across from him had already dug his grave. After finishing my coffee, I grabbed my briefcase and kissed his cheek. I told him I loved him. He told me he loved me more. The moment I closed the front door behind me, the facade dropped entirely. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock my car. I drove through the bustling morning traffic to the downtown Chicago high-rise, where my forensic financial auditing firm was located. The office was my absolute sanctuary. While my colleagues were busy tracking corporate embezzlement and international tax evasion, I bypassed the standard employee network and locked myself in my private office. I pulled the heavy blinds shut, secured the thick glass door, and booted up my isolated air-gapped server. I unclasped the silver chain from my neck and stared at the biometric hardware wallet resting in my palm. It looked like a simple polished piece of custom silver jewelry, but it housed military-grade encryption. I connected the device to my terminal using a specialized diagnostic cable. My fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing the standard user interface to access the deep system logs. I needed to see exactly what Kendrick had done while I was unconscious on Beatrice's leather sofa. Lines of green code scrolled rapidly across my black monitor. I ran a decryption script on the access history. The logs confirmed everything the audio recording had revealed. At exactly 9:42 last night, an external device had interfaced with my hardware wallet. The IP address pinged back to a shielded server, but the routing protocol had Kendrick written all over it. I saw the exact second my biometric signature had been applied. My heart hammered in my chest as I dug deeper into the specific transaction request. Kendrick had attempted to initiate a master transfer of all digital assets. He was trying to drain the entire $12 million trust in a single keystroke, but the code showed a hard rejection. I reviewed the smart contract parameters I had established years ago. I had completely forgotten about the time lock security feature. The protocol dictated that any transfer exceeding $1 million required a 30-day continuous digital handshake with my verified home network before a final biometric scan could release the funds. Kendrick had essentially started a 30-day countdown clock. The log showed the initial authorization was pending. They needed the final confirmation scan exactly 1 month from today to finalize the theft. The realization brought a sharp, dangerous smile to my face. They were locked into a rigid timeline. They could not touch a single cent until that 30-day window closed, and they had to keep me around happy and unsuspecting until they could drug me one last time. I leaned back in my ergonomic desk chair, staring at the blinking cursor on my screen. My mother-in-law wanted to treat me like a disposable peasant. My golden child sister-in-law wanted to fund her failing tech startup with my hidden wealth. My grifter brother-in-law thought he was smart enough to out-hack a forensic auditor. And my husband, the man I had trusted with my life, was the architect of my destruction. They wanted a master transfer. I decided I would give them one. But instead of routing my $12 million into Kendrick's offshore shell accounts, I was going to construct a digital honeypot. I was going to rewire the final authorization sequence. When they drugged me and pressed my thumb to the scanner next month, it would not transfer my money. It would silently trigger a federal wire fraud alert, broadcasting their exact IP addresses, device, identification numbers, and criminal intent directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I just needed to survive the next 30 days playing the perfect, oblivious wife. The next few days required mental compartmentalization I did not know I possessed. I went to work, kissed my husband when I got home, and played the part of the oblivious, exhausted wife perfectly. I let Donovan believe his gaslighting had worked. But beneath the surface, the countdown had begun. Their 30-day window was rapidly shrinking, and I knew they were growing desperate to finalize the theft. That desperation became glaringly obvious by Saturday morning when Beatrice summoned the family for a high-society brunch at an exclusive country club overlooking Lake Michigan. Beatrice loved hosting events to parade her family in front of Chicago's elite. Corporate executives filled the private dining room sipping mimosas and cutting into poached eggs. I arrived wearing a tailored navy sheath dress from a mid-tier department store. It was acceptable for brunch, but in a room filled with custom Chanel and imported silk, it was practically a neon sign screaming that I did not belong. Beatrice wasted no time targeting me. As soon as Donovan and I approached her table, she looked me up and down with a meticulously crafted expression of pity. "Kelsey, darling." Beatrice projected her voice so the surrounding guests would hear. "You are always so practical. I suppose when you work those grueling hours at that accounting firm, fashion simply falls to the wayside. You really should let me take you shopping. Donovan makes more than enough to dress his wife properly." Donovan wrapped an arm around my waist and laughed, completely complicit in his mother's humiliation tactic. "She is just focused on her spreadsheets, Mom. You know Kelsey. She would rather read a tax code than Vogue." A few of Beatrice's affluent friends offered sympathetic, condescending smiles. I forced a meek, agreeable nod. "You are right, Beatrice," I said softly. "I just do not have an eye for luxury like you do." Satisfied that she had established the pecking order, Beatrice turned her glowing attention to her pride and joy. Simone sat at the center of the table, draped in an emerald suit, looking every bit the tech visionary she pretended to be. Beside her sat Kendrick, swirling a mimosa and looking smug for a man whose only real skill was digital grifting. Simone tapped her crystal flute with a silver spoon, demanding the attention of the entire table. "I actually have some incredible news to share with everyone," Simone announced, her voice ringing clear and triumphant across the dining room. "As you all know, my luxury lifestyle app has been in the beta phase for a while now, but I am thrilled to officially announce that we have just secured a massive angel investment. We are talking 8 figures. The table erupted into applause. Beatrice beamed, reaching over to squeeze Simone's hand. "I am so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. I always knew your genius would be recognized." When does the capital clear, Simone? One of the guests asked, raising his glass in a toast. Simone exchanged a quick, loaded glance with Kendrick. The funds are currently moving through a clearing protocol, she lied effortlessly. The final transfer settles in exactly 3 weeks. We are hosting a massive launch gala right after the capital drops. 3 weeks. That aligned perfectly with the exact day the 30-day biometric lock on my hardware wallet expired. She was standing in a room full of millionaires loudly bragging about the $12 million she was planning to steal from my neck. The audacity was breathtaking. Kendrick chimed in, wrapping his arm around Simone. It took some creative financial maneuvering on my end to secure the routing, Kendrick bragged, flashing his perfect teeth. But as a crypto investor, you learn how to bypass the red tape. We are about to change the entire landscape of the Chicago tech scene. I took a slow sip of my water, masking the sharp, predatory smile threatening to break across my face. They thought they had outsmarted a forensic financial auditor. It was time to tighten the noose. I needed to ensure they made their final move exactly when and where I wanted them to. I waited until the conversation shifted toward the topic of digital security and the recent rise in corporate cyber attacks. I set my glass down and sighed, leaning forward just enough to draw the attention of the table. It is actually getting terrifying out there, I said, injecting the perfect amount of corporate fatigue into my voice. My firm just mandated a massive security overhaul for all employees who handle decentralized ledgers. The new compliance regulations are a nightmare. Kendrick stopped swirling his drink. His eyes locked onto me, suddenly sharp and alert. What kind of regulations, he asked, trying to sound casual. They are forcing us to update the firmware on all our personal hardware wallets by the end of the month, I explained, looking directly at Donovan, then at Kendrick. If we do not complete a final network synchronization from our home servers in exactly 20 days, the devices trigger an automatic lockdown. Simone leaned forward, the smugness completely draining from her face. An automatic lockdown. What does that mean? I let out a frustrated groan. It means the biometric scanners permanently brick themselves to prevent tampering. If I miss that synchronization window in 20 days, the wallet freezes, and I have to physically fly to the manufacturer's vault in Switzerland to get it manually decrypted. It is such a ridiculous hassle. The silence that fell over my husband and his family was deafening. I could practically hear the gears grinding in Kendrick's head as panic set in. 20 days. I had just artificially shortened their timeline. If they waited the full 30 days for the master transfer protocol to clear, they believed my device would be permanently locked, requiring a trip to Switzerland that would render the funds completely inaccessible to them. Donovan cleared his throat, his posture suddenly rigid. 20 days. That seems like an incredibly tight window for a corporate mandate, babe. Are you sure? Absolutely positive, I replied, offering him an innocent, tired smile. I have it marked on my calendar. I have to do the final sync right before your parents' anniversary gala. Otherwise, I am locked out completely. Beatrice's eyes darted to Donovan. Kendrick quickly picked up his water glass, his knuckles white. I leaned back in my chair, watching the absolute terror quietly consume the golden child and her grifter husband. The bait was in the water, the timeline was set, and they were going to swallow the hook whole. Monday morning arrived with a crisp breeze coming off Lake Michigan. I walked into the glass and steel lobby of my corporate office building, my heels clicking rhythmically against the polished marble floor. My mind was completely clear. The weekend brunch at the country club had been a massive success. I had watched the terror bleed into Kendrick's eyes when I artificially shortened their timeline. I knew exactly what he was doing right now. He was undoubtedly sitting in Simone's overpriced minimalist apartment, frantically trying to rewrite his routing scripts to bypass a corporate security update that did not actually exist. Kendrick loved to call himself a crypto investor. He loved using flashy buzzwords at family dinners to impress Beatrice and Winston, throwing around terms like blockchain integration and liquidity pools. But I tracked international syndicates and state-sponsored hackers for a living. To me, Kendrick was nothing more than a digital pickpocket trying to crack a bank vault with a paperclip. I bypassed the main bullpen where my colleagues were already deep into their morning audits and headed straight for my private office. I locked the heavy acoustic door behind me and closed the motorized blinds. I powered down my standard workstation. I could not risk using any machine connected to the firm's primary network. If my trap triggered a federal investigation, I needed to ensure my company remained completely insulated from the fallout. I moved to the corner of my office and unlocked a secure steel cabinet. Inside sat an air-gapped terminal. It was a sterile machine, completely disconnected from the internet, used exclusively for dissecting malicious malware and investigating compromised digital ledgers. I booted up the terminal and pulled the silver chain from beneath my blouse. The hardware wallet rested heavily in my palm. It was time to turn my $12 million legacy into a weapon. I connected the device to the terminal using a custom diagnostic interface. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard. I did not just need to block their transfer. If I simply locked the funds, Donovan and his family would deny everything. They would play dumb, claim they were trying to help me, and sweep their betrayal under the rug. I needed undeniable prosecutable proof of their intent to steal. I needed to catch them with their hands inside the digital cookie jar. I began coding a shadow ledger. In forensic auditing, we call this a honeypot. It is a decoy system designed to look exactly like a high-value target, specifically engineered to attract and trap unauthorized users. I cloned the user interface of my actual trust account. To anyone looking at the screen, it would display the exact balance, the same routing numbers, and the identical verification prompts. Next, I opened the biometric authorization protocol. This was the most critical part of the trap. The original code dictated that once the 30-day network ping was complete, a verified thumbprint would unlock the cryptographic keys and release the $12 million to whatever destination address was inputted. I meticulously stripped that command out of the execution sequence. Instead, I wrote a hidden execution script. I programmed the wallet so that when Donovan inevitably drugged me and forced my unconscious thumb onto the scanner, the device would immediately spoof a success metric. Kendrick's computer screen would light up with a beautiful green notification confirming the transfer had been initiated. They would think they had won. They would think they were multi-millionaires. But the reality running in the background would be entirely different. The moment the biometric signature was applied, my hidden script would silently activate a hostile data scrape. It would instantly capture the media access control address of the laptop Kendrick was using. It would log his local network configuration, trace his proxy servers, and capture the exact routing numbers of the offshore shell accounts he had prepared for the stolen funds. It would gather every single piece of identifying digital forensic evidence in less than 3 seconds. Then the script would compile that data into a heavily encrypted payload. I hard-coded a direct transmission protocol to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The moment they tried to steal my money, they would unknowingly transmit a fully packaged, self-verifying wire fraud alert directly to federal authorities. They would be handing the FBI a silver platter containing their own digital fingerprints, financial records, and criminal intent. I spent 4 hours refining the code, testing every possible variable. I ran simulations simulating Kendrick's likely bypass methods, ensuring the honeypot remained watertight. I had to anticipate his arrogance. I knew he would use a standard automated routing script to move the money quickly, which meant my trap would catch his entire financial network before he even had time to close his laptop. When the code was flawless, I compiled the update and flashed it directly onto the hardware wallet. The small device hummed slightly as it accepted the new parameters. I disconnected the cable and held the silver pendant up to the light. It looked exactly the same, but it was no longer just a secure bank vault. It was a digital landmine. I clasped the chain around my neck and tucked the wallet safely against my skin, right over my heart. The cold metal felt grounding. The trap was officially armed. The timeline was set. All I had to do now was wait for the anniversary gala. I powered down the air-gapped terminal, locked it back in the steel cabinet, and opened the blinds to my office. The Chicago skyline stretched out before me, bathed in bright afternoon sunlight. I took a deep, steadying breath. I had secured the technical side of my revenge. Now I needed to manage the psychological side. I needed to go home and look my husband in the eye without letting him see the predator hiding behind my smile. I gathered my things and headed for the elevator, my mind already calculating the next phase. Donovan was getting desperate. With the timeline artificially shortened, he would need to make sure I was completely financially entangled with him before the final theft. I knew he would try to bind me to Simone's sinking ship to maximize their payout. I just had to wait for him to make his move. That wait lasted exactly 48 hours. Wednesday evening, I pulled into our driveway to find Donovan's luxury sedan already parked in the garage. Walking through the front door, I expected to be greeted by the usual aromas of whatever gourmet meal he was preparing. Instead, the house was entirely dark, save for a single amber lamp glowing dimly in the living room. Donovan sat on the edge of the sofa, his tie loosened and his face buried deep in his hands. A thick manila folder rested on the glass coffee table directly in front of him. I put down my briefcase and approached him cautiously, channeling the concerned wife persona I had spent the last few days perfecting. "Donovan, what is wrong?" He looked up and I had to hand it to him. His performance was absolutely Oscar-worthy. His eyes were bloodshot, and a single, perfectly timed tear tracked down his cheek. He let out a ragged, trembling sigh and reached for my hand, pulling me down to sit closely beside him. "I messed up, Kelsey." He choked on the words, his voice thick with manufactured grief. "I messed up really badly and I am so incredibly scared." I wrapped my arms around his broad shoulders, murmuring soothing reassurances, while my eyes locked onto the manila folder. "What happened?" "You know you can tell me anything." He pulled back just enough to look deeply into my eyes. "You know Simone's startup has been struggling with liquidity while we wait for her angel investors to clear their funds. Kendrick asked me for a short-term bridge loan to cover their server costs and corporate payroll. I wanted to be a supportive brother. I leveraged a massive portion of my personal portfolio to help them out, but the market took a massive dive this week. I am facing a brutal margin call, Kelsey. If I do not provide proof of collateral by Friday, the bank is going to liquidate my accounts. It could ruin my career." The audacity of his lie was almost impressive. He was using Simone's fake angel investment, which was actually my stolen money, as the justification for his current fabricated crisis. He reached for the manila folder and pulled out a stack of dense stapled pages. "My accounting team drew up these routine tax documents. It is a joint liability form. Because we are married, I can use your financial standing to temporarily shield my accounts. It just shows the bank that we have shared assets. It does not actually cost us a single dime, and the liability dissolves the second Simone's funding drops in 3 weeks. Please, baby, I am begging you. I need you to sign this to save my job." He pressed a heavy silver pen into my palm. I looked down at the paperwork. To the untrained eye, it looked like standard banking boilerplate. Page after page of dense, mind-numbing legalese designed to make the reader surrender and sign just to make the headache go away. But I was not an untrained eye. I tracked financial obfuscation for a living. I slowly turned the pages, pretending to read them with naive confusion, while my forensic training rapidly dissected the clauses. On page 4, buried beneath a labyrinth of jargon about indemnification and cross-collateralization, I found the trap. It was not a temporary shield for his portfolio. It was a quitclaim and equity transfer disguised as a joint liability waiver. The townhouse we lived in was entirely in my name, purchased with a portion of my legitimate corporate earnings long before we got married. If I signed that specific line on page 7, I would be legally binding my property to Kendrick's fraudulent shell companies. They were not just planning to steal my $12 million digital trust. They were setting the groundwork to legally strip the equity from my home and leave me completely destitute, drowning in their fabricated corporate debt. I felt a cold sweat break out across my skin. I needed a way out. I could not refuse to sign without proving I understood the complex document which would instantly blow my cover. I needed to react exactly how a terrified, financially illiterate wife would react when handed a dense legal contract by her crying husband. I dropped the pen. It clattered loudly against the glass coffee table. "Donovan, I cannot." I gasped, my breathing suddenly growing shallow and rapid. I clutched my chest, forcing my lungs to hyperventilate. The edges of my vision blurred as I pushed myself into a full-blown manufactured panic attack. His brow furrowed. "Kelsey, it is just a formality. You just need to sign the bottom line." No, I cannot breathe. I scrambled backward on the sofa, pulling my knees to my chest. I do not understand any of this legal text. My parents lost their house when I was a kid because they signed something they did not understand. I promised myself I would never sign a bank document without having a professional explain it to me. I am terrified, Donovan. I am so overwhelmed by all these terms. I let real tears spill down my cheeks, crying hysterically as I rocked back and forth. I just need a few days to process this. Let me take it to work. Let me have one of the junior accountants read it over so I know it is safe. Please do not make me do this tonight. For a fraction of a second, the heartbroken, desperate husband vanished entirely. The mask slipped completely, and I saw the real Donovan. His jaw locked with such force, I heard his teeth grind. A flash of pure, terrifying rage darkened his eyes. His hands curled into tight fists, the veins popping against his dark skin. In that split second, I saw a calculating predator who realized his prey was backing away from the snare. The tension in the living room spiked thick and suffocating. I kept crying, watching him through my tears, waiting to see if he would snap and physically force my hand. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, the monster retreated. Donovan let out a long, heavy breath and forced his handsome face back into a mask of loving patience. He reached out and gently rubbed my arm. Okay. It is all right, babe. I am sorry I pushed you." He gathered the papers and slid them back into the folder. "I know this is scary. Take a couple of days to look it over. But we really need to get this filed soon. For us." "Thank you," I sobbed, leaning forward to bury my face in his chest. "You are the best husband." As he stroked my hair, staring out into the dark living room, I knew the stakes had just escalated. I had bought myself a few days, but his patience was completely gone. They were going to accelerate their plans, and I needed to be absolutely ready for whatever they threw at me next. The next morning, I used my fabricated panic attack to my advantage. I told Donovan I was so terrified of making a financial mistake that I needed to bring my work securely home to review everything in total isolation. I played the part of an anxious wreck, insisting I needed my home office to be completely off limits while I processed the stress. He agreed smoothly, playing the supportive partner, probably thinking my anxiety made me easier to control. But the moment his car left the driveway, my anxiety vanished, replaced by tactical precision. I knew Donovan was losing his patience. If he could not trick me into signing away the equity of my house, he would undoubtedly try to force his way into my digital trust before the 30-day window closed. I needed eyes on him. I spent my lunch break at a specialized security boutique downtown, paying entirely in cash for a set of high-definition micro cameras. By the time I returned to our townhouse, I had exactly 2 hours to wire the room before Donovan finished his shift at the bank. I installed the first camera inside the housing of the smoke detector directly above my desk, giving me a perfect bird's-eye view of my workstation. The second lens, no larger than a grain of rice, went into the spine of a thick tax law textbook on the shelf, angled perfectly to capture the door and the filing cabinets. I synced both encrypted feeds to a secure application on my phone, testing the night vision capabilities. The resolution was crystal clear. That night, the atmosphere in our bedroom was suffocating. Donovan climbed under the covers, wrapping his arm around my waist, pulling my back against his chest. I forced my breathing to slow, mimicking the deep, rhythmic inhales of a woman in a heavy sleep. Every muscle in my body screamed to push him away. The warmth of his skin felt like a threat. I lay there for what felt like hours, staring into the pitch-black darkness of the room, listening to the ticking of the wall clock. At exactly 2 a.m, the arm around my waist slipped away. Donovan shifted quietly, the mattress barely groaning as he eased himself out of bed. I kept my eyes shut, not altering my breathing pattern, even as I felt the subtle shift in air current when he padded barefoot across the carpet. The bedroom door clicked shut with a barely audible sound. I waited 10 agonizing seconds before moving. I slipped my phone from beneath my pillow and pulled the heavy duvet completely over my head, creating a dark, soundproof tent. I turned the screen brightness down to the absolute minimum and opened the secure camera feed. The first camera angle showed the dark, empty hallway outside my office. Then a shadow moved across the frame. Donovan was not alone. The front door security chime had been disabled, but the camera mic picked up the faint squeak of the hardwood stairs. Donovan stepped into the frame, followed immediately by Kendrick. Seeing my brother-in-law sneaking through my home in the middle of the night sent a spike of pure adrenaline straight into my veins. Kendrick wore a dark hoodie, his usual arrogant demeanor replaced by frantic, twitchy energy. Donovan unlocked the door to my home office using a master key I did not know he possessed. They slipped inside and I switched my phone to the bookshelf camera feed. Donovan turned on a small pen light, sweeping the beam across my locked filing cabinets and my powered-down terminal. Kendrick immediately went to work pulling a compact decryption drive from his pocket. "You said she brought the hardware wallet home?" Kendrick hissed, his voice a harsh, desperate whisper that the microphone picked up perfectly. "Simone is losing her mind, Donovan. The feds requested another audit of my shell companies today. If we do not inject capital into those accounts, the whole house of cards collapses." "Keep your voice down," Donovan snapped back, shining the light over my desk drawers. "She is asleep upstairs, but she is a light sleeper. The wallet is not in her purse. She must have locked it in the biometric safe at her corporate office." Kendrick slammed his hand against the side of my desk, the sound making me flinch under the covers. "Well, what are we supposed to do? I have the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands completely primed. They are ready to receive the $12 million right now. The routing numbers are scrubbed, the proxies are clean, and the receivers are sitting there empty. We cannot wait another 2 weeks for her to just hand it over. We need to force the transfer." I watched through the glowing screen as my husband turned to his brother-in-law. The pen light cast harsh, sinister shadows across Donovan's face, making him look completely unrecognizable. The charming, wealthy bank manager was gone. In his place was a ruthless thief willing to sacrifice his wife for a payout. "Listen to me," Donovan said, his voice dropping to a chilling deadpan register. "We are not forcing anything right now. If we trigger a physical altercation, she will freeze the accounts out of spite. We are sticking to the timeline. Beatrice and Winston are hosting their 35th anniversary gala next weekend at the Grand Hotel. The entire family will be there. It is the perfect cover." Kendrick scoffed, pacing the small confines of my office. "How does a public gala help us drain her crypto trust?" "Because she will be distracted," Donovan explained patiently. "She will be wearing the necklace with the hardware wallet. I will make sure of it. During the main dinner service, I'm going to give her a heavy dose of liquid sedatives. Not the light stuff we used at my mother's house. I have a pharmaceutical-grade central nervous system depressant. It will knock her out cold in 20 minutes. We will carry her up to the VIP suite we booked for the family, say she had a medical emergency, and while everyone is downstairs drinking champagne, we press her thumb to the scanner and take everything." My breath caught in my throat. The sheer malice in his voice was paralyzing. He was planning to hit me with something strong enough to completely shut down my nervous system. "Are you sure it will work?" Kendrick asked. "If she wakes up during the transfer, the lock fails." "She will not wake up." Donovan promised, a cruel smirk touching the corners of his mouth. "By the time she opens her eyes the next morning, the $12 million will be washed through your offshore accounts and Simone's startup will be fully funded. We just have to play our parts until the gala." I watched the two men quietly exit my office, shutting the door seamlessly behind them. I turned off the phone screen and lay there in the suffocating darkness beneath the duvet. My hands gripped the bedsheet so tightly my knuckles ached. My husband had just promised to poison me at a high society event to steal my legacy. They were accelerating the timeline, moving the theft to the upcoming anniversary gala. The stakes were no longer just financial, they were physical. My resolve hardened into pure, unbreakable steel. I was going to let them try. I spent the next morning operating on pure, undiluted adrenaline. After lying in the dark watching my husband and his brother-in-law plot to chemically sedate me, Sitting at my corporate desk analyzing standard financial ledgers felt like existing in an alternate reality. I needed a break from the sterile fluorescent lighting of my office. Around noon, I grabbed my coat and walked down to a bustling high-end artisanal coffee shop on the ground floor of my building. I just wanted 10 minutes of absolute peace, a brief moment to sip caffeine and mentally prepare for the days ahead. I should have known my husband's family would not give me even that. I was standing at the pickup counter waiting for my black Americano when a sharp, overpowering wave of expensive floral perfume hit my senses. Before I could even turn around, a manicured hand with perfectly filed acrylic nails slammed flat onto the marble counter, trapping my purse against the pastry display case. I looked up to see Simone. She wore a tailored crimson trench coat and oversized designer sunglasses, which she dramatically lowered down the bridge of her nose. The bright, bubbly, supportive sister-in-law persona she wore around Donovan was completely gone. Her eyes were hard and bloodshot, underscored by dark, heavy bags that her premium concealer had failed to completely hide. The stress of Kendrick's failing shell games and the impending federal audits was clearly eating her alive, pushing her to the brink of a public meltdown. "We need to talk," Simone demanded, her voice a sharp, commanding hiss that cut through the ambient noise of the espresso machines. "And we need to talk right now." I did not flinch. I slowly picked up my coffee cup, took a deliberate sip, and turned to face her fully. "What a lovely surprise, Simone. What brings you all the way downtown to the financial district? I thought you were busy preparing for your massive startup launch gala." She stepped closer, invading my personal space until I was backed against the counter. "Do not play games with me, Kelsey. Donovan is too soft, but I am not. He told me you threw a hysterical crying fit last night over the joint liability paperwork. He said you are stalling. Why have you not signed the documents?" I kept my expression perfectly neutral, acting like a woman who was simply concerned about her household finances, rather than a forensic auditor who knew the documents were a predatory trap to steal her home equity. "I told Donovan I needed a few days to have the contract reviewed," I said calmly. "It is a massive financial commitment, Simone. I am not comfortable binding the equity of my home to your corporate bridge loan without fully understanding the liability matrix." Simone let out a harsh, mocking laugh that drew the attention of a nearby barista. "Your home, please. You are my brother's wife. Your assets belong to this family. My investors are waiting on a liquidity transfer, and your little panic attack is holding up the entire capital pipeline. You need to go home tonight, sign the bottom line, and stop being such a selfish, paranoid roadblock." Her sheer entitlement was breathtaking. I looked at this woman draped in thousands of dollars of luxury fashion, demanding I hand over my property to fund her fraudulent lifestyle. A deep, steadying calm washed over me. I did not need to play the weeping, fragile wife right now. Donovan was not here to protect her or manage my reactions. It was just the two of us, and I was done pretending to be intimidated by her false status. I took a step forward, forcing Simone to slightly angle her chin up to meet my gaze. "Let us get something perfectly straight," I said, keeping my voice low and dangerously even. I spent my early 20s working night shifts at a subterranean data center just to pay for my auditing certifications. I ate instant ramen for 3 years straight while tracking fraudulent corporate accounts to build my resume. My mentor left me everything he had because he recognized genuine grit. I built my career, my reputation, and the equity in that townhouse with my own 2 hands and relentless hard work. Simone crossed her arms defensively, but I did not stop. "You, on the other hand, have never worked a genuine day in your entire life." I continued, letting a lifetime of silent observation bleed into my words. "You rely on Winston and Beatrice to bankroll your existence. Every failed business venture, every luxury vacation, every designer handbag you flaunt at the country club was funded by someone else's money. You play the brilliant tech entrepreneur, but we both know your company is an empty shell bleeding cash. So no, Simone. I am not signing away the only home I own just because you and Kendrick cannot manage a basic balance sheet. If your startup is failing, you need to fix it yourself." For a moment, Simone just stared at me, her mouth slightly parted in shock. She was not used to anyone speaking to her with such absolute unfiltered honesty. The golden child was used to blind obedience and sycophantic praise. Then her shock mutated into a sneer of pure unadulterated malice. The mask was completely off, and the hostility between us was finally out in the open. "You think you are so incredibly smart?" Simone whispered, her voice trembling with toxic rage. "You think because you balance a few spreadsheets that you are better than us? You are nothing, Kelsey. You are a boring, basic little accountant that my brother tolerates because you are convenient." She leaned in so close I could feel the heat of her breath against my cheek. "You want to hold on to your precious little townhouse? Fine. Keep it. Because I promise you, by the time my parents' anniversary gala is over next week, you are going to be left with absolutely nothing. You are going to lose everything you think you own, and my family will not lose a single second of sleep over it. Enjoy your cheap coffee while you still have a bank account to pay for it." Simone shoved her sunglasses back up her nose, turned sharply on her stiletto heels, and stormed out of the coffee shop, the brass bell above the door chiming merrily behind her. I stood near the counter watching her aggressive stride as she disappeared down the bustling Chicago sidewalk. Her threat was designed to terrify me, to break my spirit and put me back in my place. She thought she was delivering a masterful villain monologue. But as I took another sip of my black Americano, all I felt was a profound sense of satisfaction. Her loss of control had just confirmed everything I saw on the hidden cameras. They were desperate, they were rushing their timeline, and they were completely blinding themselves with their own arrogance. The war was no longer cold, and Simone had just marched her entire family straight into the crosshairs of my digital trap. I rode the elevator back up to my corporate floor, my pulse remarkably steady, a deep sense of calm settling over my shoulders. They were unraveling at the seams. But I knew the matriarch of the family would not let Simone fight her battles alone. Beatrice was the ultimate puppet master, and she demanded total control over every aspect of her children's lives. I expected rapid retaliation, but I did not expect it to happen quite so brazenly. The very next afternoon, my desk phone buzzed. My receptionist sounded unusually rattled as she announced I had a personal visitor. Before I could even ask for a name, the heavy acoustic glass door of my office swung open with aggressive force. Beatrice strode in, looking like she had just stepped off a private jet from Milan. She wore a pristine white cashmere coat draped perfectly over her shoulders and clutched a crocodile skin handbag that cost more than most people earned in an entire year. She looked completely out of place in my sterile, highly analytical workspace, and she purposefully used that jarring contrast to project absolute dominance. She shut the door behind her, reached out and flipped the deadbolt with a sharp, heavy click. I immediately recognized the tactic. It was textbook intimidation through the aggressive invasion of professional space. I subtly tapped the side of my smartwatch, activating the stealth audio recorder. The tiny haptic vibration against my wrist confirmed the microphone was rolling. I stood up from my ergonomic chair, painting a look of pure, unadulterated panic across my face. "Beatrice," I stammered, letting my voice waver perfectly to sell the performance. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right? Is Donovan okay?" She did not smile. She walked slowly around my desk, running a manicured finger over my mahogany bookshelf, inspecting my domain with overt disgust. "Sit down, Kelsey," Beatrice commanded, her voice dropping into a register of pure, uncompromising ice. I sank back into my chair, shrinking my posture to make myself look as small and vulnerable as possible. She leaned over my desk, planting both hands flat on the surface. "My daughter came home yesterday in tears. She tells me you are refusing to sign the liability paperwork to support your husband. She tells me you were incredibly disrespectful to her in public." I let my lower lip tremble, playing the intimidated victim. "I just do not understand the documents, Beatrice. I am scared of losing my house. It is all I have. I worked so hard to buy it before I even met Donovan." Beatrice scoffed, standing tall again and looking down her nose at me. "Your house. You arrogant, selfish girl. When you married my son, your meager assets became his assets. Our family is facing a temporary liquidity issue, and you are going to solve it. You are going to sign those papers today, and you are going to liquidate whatever pathetic savings you have to bridge the gap for Simone's launch. I shook my head rapidly, squeezing out a few genuine tears of manufactured fear. I cannot do that. Please do not ask me to do that. I cannot afford to lose my equity. Beatrice leaned in closer, her voice dripping with aristocratic venom. I am not asking you, Kelsey. I am telling you. Do you know who sits on the board of directors for this financial firm? Do you know who your largest corporate clients are? I play golf with their wives. I sit on charity committees with their husbands. I control the social narrative in this city. I can ruin your professional reputation with a single phone call. I gasped, covering my mouth with both hands as if I were hyperventilating. You would not do that. It would destroy my entire career. I would be blacklisted from every auditing firm in Chicago. Beatrice smiled, a cold, predatory stretching of her lips. I will absolutely destroy you. I will make sure you never work in finance again. I will tell the board you are mentally unstable. I will tell them you have a history of embezzlement at previous firms. I will spark a rumor that you are under active federal investigation. No firm in this city will ever trust you with their clients' ledgers again. Unless, of course, you go home tonight, sign the joint liability transfer, and hand over your equity to Donovan. You owe this family your absolute loyalty, and I will extract it from you one way or another. Every single word she spoke was pure prosecutable gold. In legal terms, she was fulfilling every single requirement for criminal extortion and corporate blackmail. I sobbed quietly into my hands, nodding my head in frantic submission to feed her massive, fragile ego. Okay, I cried, letting my voice break authentically. Okay, please. Just do not call the board. I will sign the papers. I will do whatever Donovan wants. Just give me a little more time to get the property deeds notarized. I will have it all ready by the night of your anniversary gala. Please, Beatrice, just leave my job alone. She looked down at me, her expression radiating absolute, unquestionable triumph. She believed she had broken the cheap, stubborn daughter-in-law. She believed she had protected her golden child and secured the capital they desperately needed. See that you do, Kelsey. We expect the signed transfer by the night of our anniversary gala. Do not test me again. She turned on her heel, unlocked the glass door, and marched out of my office without a single backward glance. I waited until the click of her designer heels faded completely down the corridor. Then I lowered my hands from my face. The tears stopped instantly, my expression hardening into pure, calculating resolve. I tapped my smartwatch, stopping the recording. I had just secured a recorded confession of federal extortion. The trap was growing deeper by the hour. I left my corporate building that evening with a singular, hyper-focused mission. Beatrice had given me the timeline to sign away my house, tying it perfectly to the night of her 35th anniversary gala. Donovan and Kendrick had independently chosen that exact same night to drug me and drain my digital trust. It was a synchronized assault from all sides of the family, and they were banking on my submission. I needed to ensure that when they closed their jaws, they bit down on solid steel. I navigated through the dense Chicago traffic, driving far outside my usual downtown radius. I parked in an industrial district and walked into a specialized electronics supplier that catered to private security contractors. Using cash, I purchased a blank biometric hardware wallet. To the naked eye, it was an exact duplicate of the silver pendant I wore around my neck, down to the brushed metal casing and the microscopic seams. I took the blank device straight back to my secure, air-gapped office. The digital honeypot I had coded earlier in the week was designed to catch Kendrick in the act of wire fraud. It would log his network proxies and alert federal authorities the moment the transfer was initiated. But wire fraud was a white-collar crime. I wanted Donovan behind bars for what he was planning to do to my body. He intended to drug me with a pharmaceutical-grade central nervous system depressant and force my unconscious thumb onto a scanner. That was a severe physical violation, and I needed indisputable physical evidence of the assault to lock him away for a very long time. I laid out my forensic toolkit on my desk, using a pair of precision titanium tweezers and a micro-soldering iron. I carefully popped the casing off the newly purchased blank wallet. I extracted its standard memory drive and set it aside. Next, I removed my actual hardware wallet from the silver chain around my neck, the one holding the legitimate $12 million trust. With agonizing care, I extracted the authentic cryptographic chip containing my entire fortune. I placed that priceless microchip into a static-free protective case. Now I had an empty silver pendant casing. I installed the rigged honeypot chip I had programmed earlier into the empty casing, but I did not stop there. I pulled a microscopic battery-independent GPS transmitter from my security supplies. It was the size of a crushed peppercorn. I soldered the transmitter directly into the biometric scanner relay inside the pendant. I spent the next 3 hours programming the physical trigger. I wired the circuitry so that the microtransmitter remained completely dormant, emitting 0 radio frequency signals that Kendrick might detect during a preliminary scan. The transmitter would only wake up when a human thumb applied pressure to the biometric glass. The moment Donovan pressed my thumb against the decoy, the device would do 2 things simultaneously. First, it would spoof the transfer success metric to Kendrick's laptop, triggering the federal wire fraud alert. Second, the microtransmitter would instantly ping a secure satellite connection. It would log the exact GPS coordinates of the hotel suite, capture the precise timestamp down to the millisecond, and transmit a digital distress signal to my secure servers. It would create a permanent, unalterable digital footprint, proving exactly when and where the physical assault took place. I sealed the brushed silver casing back together and polished away any microscopic scratches. I held it up to the fluorescent light. It was a flawless decoy. It looked and weighed exactly the same as my real necklace. I left my office building just as the sun was beginning to set over the city. I drove straight to a highly fortified private bank vault in the financial district, an institution that specialized in securing anonymous physical assets for high-net-worth clients. I rented a secure deposit box under a corporate shell name. I walked into the steel-lined privacy room alone with my thoughts. I took the authentic cryptographic chip containing the real $12 million, placed it inside a tamper-evident polymer bag, and locked it inside the heavy steel box. I slid the box into the wall and turned the dual lock mechanism. The heavy thud of the vault door sealing shut was the most comforting sound I had heard in weeks. My legacy was completely safe. Donovan could drug me, Simone could mock me, and Kendrick could run all the decryption software in the world. They could not touch a single cent of my mentor's money. It was buried behind 3 feet of reinforced steel miles away from their greedy hands. I walked back to my car, the cold evening air biting at my cheeks. I took the silver chain holding the rigged decoy and clasped it around my neck. The metal settled against my collarbone, cool and heavy. It felt like a suit of armor. I was no longer playing defense. I was a walking, breathing trap. I drove back to our townhouse, pulling into the driveway just as Donovan was carrying groceries through the front door. He greeted me with his signature charismatic smile, setting down a bag of fresh vegetables to pull me into a warm embrace. He kissed my cheek, his hands lightly brushing against my shoulders. He was checking to see if I was wearing the necklace. I smiled back at him, leaning into his touch, playing the role of the devoted, trusting wife perfectly. "I am so excited for your parents' anniversary gala this weekend," I lied, keeping my voice bright and cheerful. "I even bought a new dress for it. I want to make sure Beatrice is proud to have me there." Donovan's eyes gleamed with dark, hidden satisfaction. He stroked my hair, his gaze dropping briefly to the silver chain resting against my skin. "You are going to be the most beautiful woman in the room, Kelsey. It is going to be a night we will never forget." I agreed with him wholeheartedly. It was going to be unforgettable. He thought he was leading a sheep to the slaughter, but he had no idea he was walking straight into a cage I had built specifically for him. The board was set, the pieces were in place, and I was stepping willingly into the lion's den. Stepping willingly into the lion's den required a level of composure I had spent the last several weeks perfecting. The Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago was a monument to old money and aristocratic excess, the exact kind of venue Beatrice would demand for her 35th anniversary gala. Valets rushed to open the doors of Donovan's luxury sedan as we arrived. I stepped out into the crisp evening air, smoothing the fabric of my dark gown. The heavy silver chain holding the rigged decoy wallet rested securely against my collarbone, a cold reminder of the digital landmine I was carrying. Inside the grand ballroom was a spectacle of towering crystal chandeliers, cascading white floral arrangements and gold-gilded tables. The absolute elite of Chicago's high society filled the room. Politicians, bank executives, and socialites mingled over champagne flutes and classical string music. This was Beatrice and Winston's kingdom, a curated audience designed to witness their absolute superiority. Donovan offered me his arm, his smile wide and captivating. He placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me through the sea of designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. To anyone watching, we were the picture of modern matrimonial bliss. He introduced me to senior partners at his wealth management firm, kissing my cheek and calling me his brilliant, beautiful wife. He paraded me around like a prized trophy, making sure the hired event photographers captured our flawless dynamic. Every time his fingers brushed against my skin, my stomach turned. He was touching me with the gentle affection of a loving husband, while actively calculating the exact millisecond he would slip a pharmaceutical-grade sedative into my drink. He was making sure there were dozens of witnesses who could testify to how happy and healthy I looked right before my mysterious, tragic medical emergency. I leaned into his embrace, laughing at his jokes and smiling brightly for the camera flashes feeding him the illusion of total control. As we moved deeper into the ballroom, I spotted Simone and Kendrick hovering near one of the private bars. The contrast between their outward appearance and their physical reality was jarring. Simone wore a breathtaking custom-beaded gown that sparkled under the chandelier light, but her face was pale and her posture was rigid. Kendrick was squeezed into a velvet tuxedo jacket, but a noticeable sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He kept checking his phone, his thumb swiping aggressively across the screen, his jaw tight with poorly concealed panic. They were falling apart. The financial pressure of their failing tech startup and the looming threat of federal audits had pushed them to the absolute breaking point. They needed my $12 million tonight, or their entire fraudulent empire would collapse by Monday morning. I gently detached myself from Donovan, telling him I wanted to go congratulate his sister on the event. I approached the bar with a warm, oblivious smile. "Simone, you look absolutely stunning tonight," I said, my voice dripping with manufactured sincerity. "I cannot wait for your big launch next week." Simone flinched slightly when I spoke, her bloodshot eyes snapping toward me. She forced her lips into a tight, brittle smile. "Thank you, Kelsey. Yes, everything is moving forward exactly as planned. We are just securing the final capital transfers." Kendrick wiped his forehead with a cocktail napkin, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared at the silver chain around my neck, his gaze hungry and desperate. "It is going to be a very big night for us," he muttered, taking a rapid, deep swallow of his drink. "Just tying up some loose ends." I left the anxious grifters to their misery and navigated through the crowd toward the center of the room. Beatrice was holding court near a massive ice sculpture flanked by several wealthy wives of prominent corporate executives. She wore an elaborate diamond necklace that caught the light with every movement, radiating the aristocratic dominance she so desperately craved. Winston stood quietly behind her, looking unusually pale and tired, but Beatrice paid him no mind. When she saw me approaching, her eyes narrowed into familiar slits of disdain. She excused herself from her circle of admirers and stepped directly into my path, blocking me from integrating into the high society conversation. Kelsey Beatrice purred, her voice low enough to avoid drawing attention, but sharp enough to cut glass. "You actually managed to find something somewhat appropriate to wear. I am surprised. I hope you brought the property deeds we discussed." I lowered my gaze, playing the part of the thoroughly broken, intimidated daughter-in-law she had threatened in my office. "I have them in my purse." "Beatrice," I whispered, ensuring my voice trembled just enough to satisfy her ego. "I am ready to sign them whenever Donovan wants. Please, just do not ruin my career." Beatrice let out a soft, venomous chuckle. "Good girl. You are finally learning your place in this family. Now go stand quietly by my son and try not to embarrass us when dinner is served." I nodded meekly and backed away, allowing her to revel in her perceived victory. She thought she had completely conquered me. She thought she had secured my home equity and my digital trust. She had no idea she was dancing on the edge of a federal indictment. A soft chime echoed through the ballroom, and the event coordinator announced over the sound system that the main dinner service was about to begin. Guests began migrating toward their assigned tables, finding their place cards among the crystal glassware and silver cutlery. I found my seat at the primary family table, positioned directly between Donovan and Winston. Simone and Kendrick sat across from us, eyes fixed on the empty space where the servers would soon place our drinks. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the dangerous anticipation of a trap about to be sprung. I kept my posture relaxed, resting my hands in my lap. The air in the room felt thick, charged with the dangerous anticipation of a trap about to be sprung. I kept my posture relaxed, resting my hands in my lap. The culinary staff began moving through the ballroom with practiced precision, delivering the first course of the evening. Plates of seared scallops and caviar were placed before us, but nobody at our table seemed particularly interested in the food. The psychological warfare taking place beneath the surface of the polite dinner conversation was suffocating. Winston sat to my right, staring blankly at his plate. He looked incredibly haggard for a man celebrating his 35th wedding anniversary. His skin was ashen, and he kept dabbing his forehead with a monogrammed linen napkin. The crushing weight of the family's hidden financial ruin was clearly taking a severe physical toll on him. On my left, Donovan was vibrating with a terrifying concealed energy. He was checking his watch every few minutes, his charm holding steady for the surrounding guests, while his body language betrayed his predatory anticipation. Across the table, Simone and Kendrick picked at their appetizers. Simone kept shooting me venomous, impatient glares whenever she thought no one else was looking. She was looking at my neck, staring directly at the silver pendant resting against my skin. She thought she was staring at her salvation. She had absolutely no idea she was staring at a federal wire fraud trap equipped with a GPS microtransmitter. After the salads were cleared, Beatrice stood up from the head of the table. She tapped a silver fork against her crystal water glass, requesting the attention of the immediate family. Before the main course arrives, Beatrice announced, her voice dripping with aristocratic flair, "Donovan has arranged for a special signature cocktail to be served to our table, a custom blend to toast to family loyalty and the future of our legacy." Donovan stood up, flashing his million-dollar smile. "I wanted to make sure tonight was perfect," he said smoothly. "I had the bartender mix a reserve bourbon cocktail just for us. I will be right back." He stepped away from the table and walked toward the private VIP bar nestled in the corner of the ballroom. My heart began to hammer a heavy, frantic rhythm against my ribs. This was it. The moment I had been planning for since I listened to that horrifying audio recording in my bathroom. He was going to retrieve the drinks, and he was going to slip a pharmaceutical-grade central nervous system depressant directly into my glass. He intended to paralyze my body while leaving my mind completely trapped in the dark. I forced my breathing to slow, inhaling deeply through my nose and exhaling silently through my mouth. I had to maintain total situational awareness. I watched Donovan at the bar. He had his back turned to the room for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. When he turned around, he was balancing a silver tray carrying several crystal tumbler glasses filled with a dark amber liquid. He approached our table and began distributing the drinks. He handed one to Beatrice, one to Simone, and one to Kendrick. Then he placed a glass directly in front of Winston. Finally, he set the last crystal tumbler down right in front of me. He placed it with deliberate, calculated precision, ensuring his fingers lightly brushed against mine. "I had the bartender make yours slightly sweeter," Kelsey Donovan murmured, leaning down so his lips were just inches from my ear. "I know you do not usually drink bourbon. Drink up, sweetheart. It will help you relax." I looked down at the amber liquid. It looked completely normal. There was no fizz, no strange discoloration, no visible residue. It was a perfectly executed dose of poison. "To 35 years of marriage," Beatrice declared loudly, lifting her glass high into the air. "And to the continued prosperity of our family." Everyone at the table raised their glasses. I lifted mine, my mind racing. I could not drink it. If I drank it, the sedative would neutralize me before I could implement the final phase of my plan. I needed to swap the glass, but the entire table was looking at each other. I needed a distraction, and I needed it immediately. I held the poisoned glass in my right hand, keeping it suspended in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a young waiter carrying a towering tray of cleared champagne flutes, navigating through the crowded space between our table and the next. He was moving too fast, trying to avoid a guest who had suddenly stepped backward. It happened in a fraction of a second. The waiter's heel caught the edge of a heavy velvet curtain draping the floor. He lost his balance completely. The massive silver tray tilted, and dozens of crystal flutes went crashing to the hardwood floor with a deafening explosive shatter. The sound was like a gunshot in the elegant ballroom. Every single person at our table flinched and turned their heads sharply toward the source of the noise. Donovan whipped his head around. Simone gasped, her hand flying to her chest. Kendrick and Beatrice both looked away, completely distracted by the catastrophic mess unfolding just a few feet away. They gave me exactly 1 second of absolute unobserved freedom. My hands moved with the flawless practiced speed of a street magician. I did not hesitate. I reached across the few inches separating my place setting from Winston's. I grabbed the base of his safe cocktail with my left hand and simultaneously placed my poisoned glass down on his coaster with my right. I pulled his untainted drink back to my chest just as Donovan turned his head back toward our table. The swap was seamless. The glasses were completely identical. Nobody had seen a thing. What a clumsy fool, Beatrice sneered, glaring at the terrified waiter, who was now frantically trying to sweep up the broken crystal. They hire anyone these days. Donovan shook his head and turned his attention back to me. His dark eyes locked onto the glass in my hand. He raised his own tumbler. "Drink up, Kelsey. Let us toast." I looked him dead in the eye, offering him a sweet, trusting smile. "To family," I said softly. I brought the glass to my lips and took a generous sip. The bourbon burned pleasantly down my throat. It was strong, but it was completely clean. I coughed slightly, playing the role of the lightweight wife, tapping my chest and grimacing. "Wow!" I gasped, fanning my face with my free hand. "That is really strong, Donovan. I am already feeling warm." Across the table, Donovan caught Kendrick's eye. A dark, vicious smirk spread across my husband's face. He gave Kendrick a microscopic nod, confirming the payload had been delivered. Kendrick leaned back in his chair, a look of pure relief and predatory excitement washing over his features. He reached under the table, undoubtedly tapping his pocket to make sure he had his decryption laptop ready for the transfer. Beside me, Winston picked up the poisoned glass I had left on his coaster. He let out a heavy, exhausted sigh, completely oblivious to the lethal sedative swimming in the amber liquid. He brought the glass to his lips and took a massive, desperate swallow, seeking liquid courage for his own hidden financial demons. I set my glass down, keeping my posture perfectly still. Donovan thought he had just initiated the final sequence of his grand heist. He thought he had successfully dosed me with a chemical restraint. He believed he was in total control of the night. The trap was locked. The poison was in play. The countdown to the blackout had officially begun. I needed to time my performance perfectly. 20 minutes. That was the timeline Donovan had promised Kendrick in my home office. I kept my eyes on the ornate grandfather clock positioned near the ballroom entrance. Every tick of the brass pendulum echoed in my ears. I forced myself to eat a few bites of the filet mignon the servers had placed in front of me, chewing slowly to ground my racing heart. Beside me, Winston was already beginning to fade. He blinked sluggishly, his posture slumping as the heavy pharmaceutical sedative fought against his nervous system. He attributed his exhaustion to the stress of his hidden debts, rubbing his eyes and pushing his plate away. I had to make my move before he completely lost consciousness. If Winston collapsed first, it would ruin the entire timeline. I needed Donovan to extract me from the ballroom immediately. At exactly the 18-minute mark, I initiated the sequence. I started by letting my fork slip from my fingers. It clattered loudly against the fine china. I let out a soft, confused laugh, reaching for the fork, but deliberately missing it by an inch. I allowed my eyelids to droop, fighting to keep them open, mirroring the heavy, suffocating drag of a chemical depressant. I turned my head toward Donovan. The motion was intentionally jerky and uncoordinated. "Donovan," I murmured, letting my tongue go thick and lazy. I dragged the syllables out, blurring the consonants together. "I do not feel so good. The room is spinning." I tried to stand up, gripping the edge of the gold-gilded table. I pushed my chair back, letting my knees buckle just enough to demonstrate a total loss of motor control. I swayed dangerously, my shoulder knocking hard into Donovan. My husband swooped in with terrifying practiced efficiency. He caught me instantly, wrapping his strong arms around my waist to keep me upright. His face morphed into a mask of pure, frantic concern for the benefit of the surrounding guests. "Kelsey, sweetheart, I have got you," he said loudly, ensuring the nearby corporate executives heard his devotion. "What is wrong? Are you faint?" Across the table, Kendrick shot out of his chair, abandoning his dinner. Simone covered her mouth, playing the shocked sister-in-law. Beatrice simply sighed, shaking her head with aristocratic disdain. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Beatrice projected over the music. "I told you she was working too hard. The poor girl is completely exhausted. Get her upstairs to the VIP suite, Donovan. Let her sleep it off. We will handle the guests." Donovan nodded, playing the heroic husband. Kendrick rushed around the table to take my other side. Together they hooked their arms under my armpits. I let my legs turn into absolute jelly. Being dragged by two grown men while actively maintaining dead weight is physically agonizing. My toes dragged across the plush ballroom carpet. I let my head loll forward, my chin resting heavily against my chest. We exited the main ballroom, pushing through the heavy double doors and out into the quiet marble-lined corridor. The moment we were out of sight from the main crowd, Donovan's gentle, concerned grip turned into a vice. His fingers dug painfully into my ribs. The loving husband act evaporated the second the doors closed. "Get her to the service elevator," Donovan hissed at Kendrick. "We do not have time to wait for the main lifts. She is completely under." Kendrick hauled my right side with rough, panicked urgency. We moved quickly down the service hallway. I kept my breathing shallow and erratic. Every instinct screamed at me to brace my legs to stop my ankles from twisting as they dragged me, but I forced every muscle to remain entirely flaccid. The service elevator doors slid open and they hauled me inside. The harsh fluorescent lighting pierced through my closed eyelids, but I did not dare twitch. "Did anyone notice?" Kendrick asked, his voice shaking with adrenaline. He was panting heavily from the extreme physical exertion. "No," Donovan replied coldly. "My mother played it perfectly. Everyone thinks she just had a dizzy spell. The sedative acted right on schedule. I told you it would. Get your laptop ready. We only have a few minutes before Simone has to give her speech." The elevator dinged at the penthouse floor. They dragged me down the quiet carpeted hallway. I heard the electronic beep of a keycard scanning, followed by the heavy click of the VIP suite door unlocking. They pulled me inside, kicking the door shut behind them. The suite smelled of expensive room service and fresh lilies. They hauled me over to a large velvet sofa in the center of the room. They did not lay me down gently. Donovan practically dropped me. I hit the velvet cushions with a jarring thud, my head bouncing slightly against the firm armrest. It took every ounce of willpower I possessed not to groan or rub my sore neck. I let my left arm dangle off the edge of the sofa, my fingers brushing the floor. I completely surrendered control of my body, becoming a lifeless mannequin. My mind raced through the meticulous preparations I had made. Every line of code I had written, every microchip I had soldered, converged onto this single terrifying point in time. The margin for error was absolutely zero. If I failed now, I lost everything. I lay there motionless, trapped in my own dark, silent performance. The terror of giving myself away was suffocating. If my breathing hitched, if my eyelid fluttered, if my heart beat too visibly against my chest, the entire trap would be blown. I listened to the sound of Kendrick unzipping a leather bag and booting up his laptop. The digital heist was only moments away. I just had to stay perfectly, flawlessly still as the predators closed in around me. The heavy wooden door of the VIP suite swung open with a sharp click. The unmistakable sound of designer heels striking the polished marble entryway echoed through the room. Beatrice and Simone had arrived from the ballroom. I kept my breathing shallow, my eyes rolled back slightly behind my closed lids to prevent any involuntary fluttering. "Is it done?" Beatrice demanded. Her voice lacked any trace of the maternal warmth she projected downstairs. It was clinical sharp and entirely devoid of empathy. "We have her," Donovan replied, his footsteps moving closer to the velvet sofa where I lay paralyzed by my own performance. "She went down exactly on schedule. Winston took a heavy dose too, but he is just sleeping it off at the table. We need to move quickly before anyone comes looking for us." Kendrick was typing furiously. The rapid clicking of his keyboard filled the tense silence of the suite. "The proxies are aligned," Kendrick announced, his voice tight with adrenaline. "I have the destination shell accounts primed and ready to receive the capital. We just need the hardware wallet and the biometric authorization to clear the 30-day lock, expose the necklace." I felt a sudden shift in the air current as Simone stepped right up to the edge of the sofa. The overwhelming scent of her expensive floral perfume washed over me, sickeningly sweet and suffocating. "Move out of the way," Donovan, Simone scoffed. "Let me do it." I braced myself internally, forcing every muscle fiber in my torso to remain entirely slack. Simone did not bother with careful hands. She grabbed the collar of my emerald silk blouse and yanked downward with brutal, resentful force. The fabric tore slightly. A small plastic button popped off the shirt, pinging sharply against a nearby glass coffee table before skittering across the floor. The cold, conditioned air of the hotel suite hit my exposed chest. I lay there completely vulnerable, stripped of my dignity by the woman who called me her sister. "God, look at this," Simone sneered, her voice dripping with absolute disgust. "Even when she tries to dress up, she wears this cheap, basic lingerie. It is pathetic. She is sitting on a $12 million digital trust and she dresses like a discount rack peasant. I cannot wait to put her money to actual use." "Just get the pendant," Beatrice ordered, completely unfazed by her daughter's physical assault on my unconscious body. "We need to stage the rest of the scene. Donovan, you need to make sure she looks the part when she finally wakes up. If she wanders down to the lobby later, I want every guest in this hotel to think she is just another sloppy, classless drunk who could not handle a high society dinner. Smear her makeup, make her look entirely out of control." I felt Donovan lean over me. The man who had kissed me at the altar, who had promised to protect me, reached down without a single word of protest. He pressed his heavy thumb against my lower lip. He dragged his skin roughly across my mouth, pushing the red lipstick down and across my chin in a jagged, humiliating streak. The physical violation was profound. It was not just a theft of my assets, it was a total desecration of my humanity. I stayed perfectly limp, swallowing the fiery, acidic rage burning in the back of my throat. "I have the hardware wallet," Donovan said, his fingers fumbling with the silver chain around my neck. He pulled the decoy pendant up, resting it flat against my exposed collarbone. "Kendrick, is the interface ready?" "Ready." Kendrick confirmed, his chair squeaking as he leaned closer to the coffee table. "The bypass terminal is synced. Press her thumb to the glass scanner. Do it firmly so we do not trigger a misread." Donovan grabbed my right hand. He lifted my arm, which I kept entirely devoid of resistance, letting it hang like dead weight in his grip. He isolated my thumb, holding my wrist steady with his other hand. "Here we go," Donovan muttered. He pressed my thumb down hard against the cold glass of the biometric scanner. For a fraction of a second, the room was completely silent. My heart pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs, terrified that they would hear it, terrified that the decoy microchip would fail. I had programmed the honeypot to spoof a success metric, but executing code in a sterile office was very different from executing it in the field. Then a bright melodic chime echoed from Kendrick's laptop. "Yes!" Kendrick erupted, his voice cracking with pure, unrestrained euphoria. "The system accepted the biometric signature. The 30-day network lock is bypassed. The master transfer is initiating right now. We got it. The 12 million is routing straight into our offshore holding accounts." Simone let out a sharp, triumphant shriek, clapping her hands together. Oh my God, we actually did it! My startup is saved. The federal auditors are going to find completely capitalized accounts by Monday morning. We are going to be untouchable. I felt Donovan drop my hand. My arm fell limply back onto the velvet cushions, striking my thigh with a dull thud. He let out a long, heavy exhale, the sound of a man who believed he had just successfully committed the perfect crime. "We need to get back downstairs immediately," Beatrice commanded, cutting through their chaotic celebration with ruthless discipline. "We cannot be absent from the ballroom for too long. People will start asking questions. Pack up the laptop, Kendrick. Leave her exactly as she is. By the time that sedative wears off tomorrow morning, the money will be completely washed through the Cayman accounts, and she will be none the wiser." I listened to the frantic rustling as Kendrick shoved his cables and laptop back into his leather bag. They were so blinded by their own greed, so intoxicated by the illusion of victory, that they did not bother to check the secondary details on the terminal screen. They did not notice the microtransmitter hidden inside the decoy wallet, which had just silently pinged a federal satellite. They did not know that their exact GPS coordinates, IP addresses, and device identification numbers were currently being packaged and transmitted directly to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. "Let us go celebrate our 35th anniversary," Mother Donovan said smoothly. The golden boy had returned. The four of them walked toward the exit. The heavy hotel suite door swung open, letting in a brief murmur of distant music from the ballroom below, and then clicked shut, sealing the deadbolt behind them. They left me lying on the velvet couch, my blouse torn open, my makeup smeared completely alone in the dark. They thought they had left a broken, oblivious victim. They did not know they had just locked themselves inside a federal prison cell. When I was absolutely certain they had boarded the elevator to return to the gala, I opened my eyes. The paralysis vanished. I sat up on the velvet couch, my mind calculating. I quickly rebuttoned my emerald silk blouse, pulling the fabric tight to hide the missing button Simone had ripped away. I walked over to the gilded mirror above the console table. Using a linen napkin, I scrubbed the red lipstick Donovan had smeared across my chin. I restored my face to a mask of absolute control. I turned my careful attention to the glass coffee table. Kendrick had made the ultimate, unforgivable rookie mistake. He had left his decryption laptop sitting wide open. He believed the 30-day lock had been bypassed and wanted to leave the terminal running to ensure the transfer finished clearing. In reality, he had just handed me unrestricted access to his entire criminal network. I sat down in front of his machine. He had left the administrator privileges unlocked. I pulled up the background execution logs. A beautiful validating string of code stared back at me. The decoy hardware wallet had performed flawlessly. The moment Donovan pressed my thumb to the scanner, the honeypot had intercepted Kendrick's routing sequence. The hidden script had already scraped his media access control address, logged his proxy servers in the Cayman Islands, and captured the exact device identification number of this laptop. The encrypted payload had successfully transmitted to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The federal wire fraud alert was active. The authorities already had everything they needed. I took a secure screenshot of Kendrick's active terminal, sending the image directly to my encrypted cloud server as a backup. I left the laptop exactly as I found it. With the digital trap fully secured, I unlocked the deadbolt and slipped out into the plush carpeted hallway. The VIP suites formed a mezzanine ring overlooking the main grand ballroom. I moved silently to the ornate marble balustrade and looked down at the glittering sea of Chicago elite below. Down on the main floor, the dinner service was concluding. Simone was stepping up to the small stage situated near the head table. She held a crystal champagne flute in one hand and a microphone in the other. She looked radiant, flushed with the arrogant high of a woman who believed she had just stolen $12 million. "Thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate 35 years of my parents' legacy," Simone announced, her voice echoing through the massive ballroom speakers. "Tonight is about the massive new ventures we are embarking on together." At the family table directly below my vantage point, Beatrice beamed with pride. Donovan was sitting casually in his chair, a smug, relaxed smile painted across his handsome face. He thought I was unconscious in the suite behind me. He thought he had won. Next to Donovan sat Winston. The pharmaceutical-grade sedative Donovan had slipped into the bourbon was a heavy depressant designed to paralyze a healthy 30-year-old woman. Winston was a 60-year-old man under extreme cardiovascular stress from his hidden debts. The chemical payload was hitting his system like a freight train. Simone raised her glass higher. Raise your glasses to Beatrice and Winston, to family, to loyalty, and to a very profitable future. As the ballroom erupted into polite applause, Winston tried to stand up to acknowledge the toast. He placed both hands on the table, pushing his weight upward. He made it exactly halfway to his feet. His knees buckled completely. His arms gave out, lacking the basic motor function to support his own frame. Winston did not just stumble. He went completely rigid. His eyes rolled back into his head and he tipped backward like a felled tree. He crashed backward directly into a towering 5-tier champagne pyramid situated just behind his chair. Hundreds of crystal flutes shattered simultaneously, creating an explosive, deafening roar of breaking glass that drowned out the applause. Champagne sprayed across the floor in a massive tidal wave. Winston hit the hardwood floor with a sickening heavy thud, his body completely limp among the glittering shards of ruined crystal. The elegant ballroom descended into instantaneous, terrifying chaos. Screams pierced the air. Guests scrambled backward, their designer gowns catching on overturned chairs. Simone dropped her microphone. Beatrice let out a piercing shriek, rushing toward her husband. She fell to her knees in the spilled champagne, shaking Winston by the shoulders, but he was entirely unresponsive. His face was dangerously pale, his breathing dangerously shallow. Donovan leaped out of his chair. He grabbed Winston's wrist, desperately feeling for a pulse. I watched my husband's face morph from practiced charm to sheer, unadulterated terror. He looked at the shattered glass, then looked at the empty spot on the table where his father's drink had been. He realized the glasses had been swapped. He realized he had just chemically poisoned his own father. "Call an ambulance now!" Donovan roared, his voice cracking with panic. "Somebody call 911 right now! He is not waking up!" Kendrick stood frozen at the table, his hands clutching his head. If Winston died from the sedative they had procured, they were no longer looking at wire fraud. They were looking at federal manslaughter. The Golden family was fracturing in real time, their perfect facade crumbling faster than the shattered champagne tower. I stood on the mezzanine watching them scramble in the wreckage of their own making. The distant wailing sound of emergency sirens began to bleed through the heavy hotel windows. I took a deep breath and smoothed the wrinkles from my dark skirt. It was time for me to go downstairs. It was time for the heartbroken, traumatized daughter-in-law to make her dramatic entrance, demand to know what had happened to her beloved father-in-law, and lock the doors of their prison from the outside. The blinding hospital lights replaced the hotel chandeliers. I huddled in a plastic chair in the emergency waiting area, arms wrapped tightly around my torn emerald blouse. Behind closed doors, medical teams were pumping Winston's stomach, fighting to flush the sedative from his system. Beatrice paced the floor like a caged panther, her pristine gown stained with spilled champagne. Simone stood near the vending machines, chewing her acrylic nails to the quick, her eyes darting frantically. Kendrick was completely silent, leaning against a wall, his face the color of wet ash. Donovan paced in the opposite direction, running his hands over his head. He had nearly killed his own father. Beatrice stopped pacing and locked her furious eyes on me. She pointed a trembling finger straight at my chest. "You did this!" she shrieked, her voice echoing down the sterile corridor. "You poisoned him. My husband was perfectly fine until he sat next to you. You slipped something into his glass." I shrank back into the plastic chair, making my shoulders tremble. I forced tears to spill over my cheeks. "Beatrice, how could you say that?" I sobbed, letting my voice crack with genuine-sounding hysteria. "I did not touch his drink. I would never hurt Winston." "Do not lie to me," Beatrice roared. "You always resented us. You felt out of place tonight, and you took it out on him." I buried my face in my hands, crying harder. "I did not even go to the bar," I wailed, peeking through my fingers to ensure my audience was watching. Donovan brought the drinks. He handed them directly to us. He gave Winston his glass, and he gave me mine. I never even stood up. The waiting room went completely silent. Beatrice froze. Simone stopped chewing her nails. Kendrick squeezed his eyes shut. Donovan stopped pacing. The absolute truth of my statement hit them simultaneously. Dozens of witnesses in the ballroom saw Donovan distribute the custom bourbon cocktails. Donovan, Beatrice whispered, turning her horrified gaze toward her golden son. "Mom, no, I swear," Donovan stammered. "I did not put anything in my father's drink. I would never do that." "Then how did he collapse?" Beatrice demanded. Before Donovan could formulate another lie, the double doors of the emergency room swung open. Two uniformed police officers walked into the waiting area. The hospital was legally required to contact law enforcement when a patient presented with severe chemical poisoning. "Are you the family of Winston?" The taller officer asked, his hand resting on his utility belt. Beatrice stepped forward, her aristocratic dominance returning. "I am his wife. These are our children. What is the meaning of this, ma'am?" "The toxicology report indicates your husband ingested a massive dose of a restricted central nervous system depressant," the officer stated clearly. "We need to ask some questions about the timeline of events leading up to his collapse." The officer turned his gaze directly toward my husband. "Sir, multiple witnesses stated you were the one who procured and delivered the beverages to the table. We need you to step into a private room with us to discuss exactly what happened." Donovan looked like he was going to vomit. The blood drained from his face. He looked at Kendrick for help, but the grifter looked at the floor, refusing to make eye contact with the police. Simone backed away. "Officers, this is a massive misunderstanding," Donovan pleaded, his voice cracking. "My father must have taken his own medication before the event. I just brought him a normal bourbon." "We will sort that out in the interview room, sir," the second officer said firmly. "Please come with us." As the police escorted a panicking Donovan away, I kept my face buried in my hands, letting my shoulders shake. Beatrice sank into a chair, completely defeated, staring blankly at the wall. The flawless, powerful family was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. Amidst the heavy tension, I felt a sharp double vibration against my thigh. My phone was buzzing in my pocket. It was the customized haptic feedback pattern I had programmed for my secure servers. I kept my head down, using my torn blouse to shield my movements. I slipped my phone out of my pocket and unlocked the screen. A stark, encrypted notification glowed brightly against the dark interface. The message was generated by the automated script I had buried inside the decoy hardware wallet. It was a direct status update from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. The text was concise and absolutely beautiful. "Wire fraud protocol successfully executed. Target IP addresses logged. Proxy servers traced. Shell company accounts in the Cayman Islands completely frozen by federal mandate." I read the glowing words 3 times. Kendrick's attempt to drain my $12 million trust had not just failed, it had triggered the ultimate irreversible trap. By attempting the biometric authorization, he had unknowingly handed the FBI full access to his entire fraudulent network. The authorities had instantly locked down every single account connected to his laptop. The massive angel investment Simone was loudly bragging about was entirely gone. Her tech startup was dead. Kendrick's grifting empire was destroyed. The federal government was already dissecting their financial records, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to stop it. I slowly looked up, peering through my messy, tear-stained hair. Simone paced near the hallway, typing furiously on her phone, trying to contact her bank. She had no idea her accounts were seized. She had no idea her brother was being interrogated for poisoning their father. She had no idea the quiet, cheap daughter-in-law she had mocked and assaulted was the architect of their total destruction. I quietly slid my phone back into my pocket. I wiped a stray tear from my cheek and let out a soft, broken whimper, playing the devastated wife perfectly. The trap had snapped shut with bone-crushing force. All that remained was watching them bleed out. 2 days bled into one another following the chaos at the hospital. The sheer force of Beatrice and her aristocratic privilege managed to suppress the police investigation. When Winston finally regained consciousness, groggy and completely disoriented from the stomach pumping, Beatrice hovered over his hospital bed and loudly insisted he must have accidentally mixed up his blood pressure medication with a sleeping pill before the gala. Winston, terrified of a public scandal and completely browbeaten by his wife, nodded along with the fabricated story. The police, lacking physical evidence to contradict the victim's own statement, released my husband pending further routine inquiries. Donovan returned to our townhouse acting like a man who had just conquered the world. He walked through the front door with a terrifying, arrogant bounce in his step. He believed he had perfectly navigated a crisis. More importantly, he believed he was now a multimillionaire. I played the traumatized, exhausted wife for exactly 48 hours, fetching him water and listening to his fake apologies about how stressful the hospital trip had been. On Thursday evening, I sat on the living room sofa while Donovan paced the floor talking on speakerphone with his sister. Simone sounded completely manic, her voice vibrating with an artificial high. The vendor just approved the expanded credit line for the tech launch event tomorrow night. Simone boasted, the audio echoing through our living room. I just booked a secondary venue hall for the after-party and hired 2 more bartending teams. I am putting it all on the corporate cards. Donovan chuckled, pouring himself a generous glass of scotch. Just do not max everything out before the capital clears the international routing, Simone. We do not want to trigger any bank flags. Kendrick says the 12 million is in the final clearing stage, Simone scoffed confidently. The offshore portal shows the incoming transfer is fully locked. It hits our accounts by Monday morning at the absolute latest. I am going to be the undisputed queen of the Chicago tech scene by tomorrow night. The media coverage alone will be worth millions. I kept my eyes fixed on the television screen, sipping a cup of herbal tea. They were staring at a ghost balance. Kendrick's dashboard was showing an incoming transfer because the federal honeypot I designed was actively feeding his server dummy data to keep him online while the authorities mapped his entire criminal network. Simone was aggressively leveraging lines of credit based on a massive fortune that was actually sitting securely behind 3 feet of steel in my private bank vault. The financial crater she was digging for herself was going to be absolutely spectacular. Friday morning arrived crisp and bright. Donovan put on a fresh designer suit, kissed my cheek, and told me he was heading to the hospital to help Beatrice handle Winston's discharge paperwork. He promised to be back in time for us to get ready for Simone's massive launch party. The second his luxury sedan pulled out of the driveway, I locked the front door and went straight to work. The time for hiding was officially over. I walked upstairs to our master bedroom and pulled a large hard-shell suitcase from the back of the closet. I moved methodically, packing only the items that truly belonged to me. I packed my financial certifications, my secure hard drives, and the few pieces of sentimental jewelry my mentor had given me. I left behind every single gift Donovan had ever purchased for me. I left the cheap practical clothes they had mocked me for wearing. I stripped my side of the closet completely bare. Next, I opened my laptop and drafted a formal notice to my property management company. I informed them I was vacating the townhouse immediately and attached the executed listing agreement from a real estate broker I had retained yesterday. I was liquidating the property. Donovan had tried to force me into signing away my home equity to cover his fabricated debts. Instead, I was pulling the rug entirely out from under his feet. He would return to this house on Monday to find a lockbox on the front door and an eviction notice addressed to him. With my bags packed and secured in the trunk of my car, I drove downtown to a sleek, glass-walled law firm. My attorney, a ruthless litigator who specialized in high-net-worth divorces, was waiting for me in his corner office. "Are you absolutely certain you want to file today?" he asked, sliding a thick stack of documents across the polished mahogany table. "Once this enters the county system, it is public record." I picked up the heavy brass pen. "I am certain. File the petition." I signed my name with sharp, precise strokes. The divorce was officially in motion. I was severing every legal tie to Donovan and his predatory family. They could not touch my assets, and they could not claim ignorance when the federal indictments rained down on them. Leaving the law firm, I felt lighter than I had in years. But I had one final stop to make before the sun went down. For months, I had dressed like a discount rack peasant to protect my secret. I had endured Beatrice's public shaming and Simone's aristocratic bullying. I had made myself small to make them feel big. That performance was officially terminated. I walked into an ultra-luxury boutique on the Magnificent Mile, a store Beatrice frequented but could only afford to buy accessories from. The sales associates immediately rushed forward. I spent 2 hours working with a private tailor. I selected a breathtaking razor-sharp tailored suit in a deep commanding shade of crimson. The fabric was imported Italian silk blend, the cut aggressive and uncompromising. I paired it with sleek stiletto heels and a minimalist diamond choker that cost more than Simone's entire startup budget. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the fitting room. My dark hair was pulled back into a sleek, powerful style. The crimson suit fit me like custom armor. The woman staring back at me was not a naive, overworked auditor. She was a multi-millionaire apex predator, and she was finally dressed for the hunt. I swiped my black card, paying for the ensemble outright. I walked out of the boutique and stepped into the cool evening air. Simone's tech launch event started in exactly 2 hours. It was time to go burn their empire to the ground. The 2 hours leading up to Simone's tech launch event passed in a blur of calculated precision. I parked my car across the street from the opulent Grand Symphony Hall, watching the sheer magnitude of her financial hubris unfold in real time. Simone had spared absolutely no expense for her grand debut. Massive searchlights swept across the historic stone facade, projecting her company logo directly into the night sky. A fleet of valet attendants hustled to park a seemingly endless stream of luxury vehicles. She had transformed the venue into a monument of her own arrogance, paying for everything using high-interest corporate credit leveraged against my stolen $12 million. She was currently burning through cash she did not actually possess, digging a financial grave so deep she would never be able to climb out. I adjusted the lapels of my crimson silk suit. The fabric felt like a second skin. For the first time since I met Donovan, I was not shrinking my posture or hiding behind a fake, timid smile. I stood tall, my stiletto heels planted firmly on the pavement. The crisp night air felt invigorating, fueling the adrenaline pumping through my veins. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb directly in front of me. The rear doors opened and 2 men in sharp, inconspicuous dark suits stepped out onto the sidewalk. Special Agent Caldwell and Special Agent Pierce from the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network moved with the quiet, unmistakable efficiency of federal law enforcement. I had been coordinating with their cyber division ever since the honeypot triggered on the night of the anniversary gala. They had spent the last 48 hours mapping Kendrick's offshore routing protocols, securing the warrants, and verifying the digital evidence. "Are we ready to proceed?" Agent Caldwell asked, his voice low and professional over the ambient noise of the city traffic. "The decoy account is completely locked on our end," Agent Pierce added, adjusting his earpiece. "The shell companies in the Cayman Islands are frozen solid. We have squad cars standing by on the perimeter. We just need to execute the final takedown." I handed Agent Caldwell a small encrypted flash drive. That contains the raw audio file from the VIP suite, along with the screen capture of Kendrick's active terminal. My corporate IT contact just bypassed the venue's audiovisual network and granted us unrestricted backdoor access. The main projector screen inside the ballroom is now entirely under my control. I pulled a sleek black remote clicker from my clutch purse. It had a single illuminated button. Caldwell took the drive and nodded. "We will hang back by the main exit doors until you initiate the sequence. Once you drop the hammer on the screen, we move in for the arrests. Do not let your husband get too close to you. He is facing serious federal charges for the pharmaceutical tampering, and desperate men are incredibly unpredictable." I offered the agents a cold, confident smile. He will not lay another finger on me. I turned and walked across the street, ascending the wide marble steps of the Symphony Hall. The heavy brass doors swung open, and I stepped into the venue. The atmosphere inside was suffocatingly extravagant. Waiters in white tuxedos circulated with trays of vintage champagne and beluga caviar. Dozens of local media outlets had set up cameras near the main stage. The room was packed with elite venture capitalists, angel investors, and tech journalists, all eager to see the brilliant young entrepreneur who had supposedly just secured an 8-figure capital injection. I slipped unnoticed into the back of the massive ballroom flanking the crowd. Up on the brightly lit stage, Simone was soaking in the adoration. She wore a striking silver designer gown, pacing the platform with a wireless microphone. A massive LED screen behind her displayed a glossy, meaningless graphic of her company logo. She was delivering a passionate, utterly hollow speech about digital innovation and breaking glass ceilings. "The capital we have secured this week is not just an investment," Simone projected smoothly, pausing to let the audience applaud. "It is a validation of our vision. It is proof that when you have the right team and the right family backing you, absolutely anything is possible." Down in the front row, Beatrice sat like a queen on her throne. She wore a triumphant, sickeningly proud expression, clapping delicately for her golden child. Sitting right beside her was Donovan. He leaned back in his chair, swirling a glass of scotch, looking incredibly smug. He looked like a man who believed he had successfully stolen a fortune, poisoned his own father, and gotten away with it completely undetected. I did not hide in the shadows any longer. I stepped out from the back wall and began walking straight down the center aisle of the ballroom. My crimson suit caught the brilliant lighting of the chandeliers, the sharp, aggressive cut of the silk, and the steady, commanding click of my heels against the hardwood floor drew immediate attention. A few investors near the back turned their heads, their conversations trailing off, as I marched forward. The crowd naturally began to part, creating a clear, unobstructed path directly to the front row. It took Donovan exactly 10 seconds to spot me. He was lifting his scotch glass to his lips when his dark eyes locked onto my approaching figure. He froze completely. His brain struggled to process the visual information. He was expecting his quiet, boring, financially illiterate wife, who dressed exclusively in discount rack clothes and submitted to his mother's bullying. He did not recognize the apex predator walking toward him. Donovan abruptly stood up, nearly knocking over his chair. He slammed his glass down onto a nearby cocktail table. Beatrice noticed his sudden movement and followed his gaze. Her jaw actually dropped. The aristocratic sneer she always wore dissolved into pure, unadulterated shock. Donovan marched aggressively down the aisle to intercept me, blocking my path about 20 feet from the stage. "What in the world are you doing here?" Donovan hissed, his voice a low, furious whisper, designed to avoid drawing the attention of the surrounding guests. He grabbed my elbow, attempting to steer me toward the exit. "Why are you dressed like that? You are supposed to be at home, packing up the house. You have no business being at this launch." I smoothly pulled my arm out of his aggressive grip. I did not shrink back. I did not lower my eyes. I stood perfectly straight, looking at the man I had once vowed to spend my life with. "I would not miss this launch for the world, Donovan." I replied, my voice steady, carrying a lethal, icy calm. "I just came to offer a little presentation of my own." His brow furrowed in confusion. A flash of genuine anxiety crossed his handsome face as he looked at my calm demeanor, then down at the object I was holding in my right hand. I raised my arm, holding the black remote clicker up where he could clearly see it. My thumb rested gently against the single illuminated button. I offered my husband a sharp, brilliant smile. The time for hiding was over. The trap was ready to spring shut. I pressed the illuminated button on the clicker. Donovan lunged forward, reaching out to grab my wrist, but he was exactly 1 second too late. Up on the brightly lit stage, Simone was right in the middle of a grand, sweeping gesture, thanking her fictitious angel investors. The massive, high-definition LED screen behind her instantly went pitch black. The sudden absence of light plunged the front of the ballroom into shadow. Simone faltered, tapping her microphone and looking nervously toward the audiovisual booth in the balcony. Then the hidden audio file began to play. It did not just play, it roared. The corporate IT contact had successfully routed my encrypted file directly into the Symphony Hall master sound system. The acoustics, designed for classical orchestras, now broadcast the crystal-clear high-fidelity recording of the VIP hotel suite. "Get her shirt open, Simone. We need to access the chain." Donovan's cold, calculating voice bounced off the gilded ceilings. The wealthy investors in the front rows froze their champagne flutes, halted halfway to their mouths. Donovan stopped dead in his tracks right in front of me. The blood rapidly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified ghost. "I cannot stand touching her. Look at this stitching. I am unbuttoning this cheap blouse, and it feels like it came from a discount rack." Simone dropped her microphone. It hit the wooden stage floor with a loud, piercing screech of feedback. She whipped around to stare at the black screen, her mouth hanging open in absolute horror, as her own cruel aristocratic sneer was broadcast to every single tech journalist and venture capitalist in Chicago. "Hurry up and find the hardware wallet!" Beatrice's sharp, commanding tone filled the room next. "Winston is keeping the staff busy in the kitchen, but we do not have all night. Kendrick has the bypass terminal ready on his laptop. Just get her thumb." A collective gasp rippled through the massive ballroom. The elite guests, the politicians and the bankers were suddenly listening to a real-time unfiltered recording of a coordinated physical assault and financial robbery. The polite high society atmosphere completely disintegrated. People began whispering frantically, pointing at the stage and then down at the family sitting in the front row. "Smear her lipstick, pull her shirt crooked, make her look like the sloppy drunk she is." When Beatrice's vicious command played over the speakers, the matriarch of the family physically collapsed into her front row seat. She clutched her diamond necklace, her chest heaving as she struggled to pull air into her lungs. The pristine, untouchable reputation she had spent 35 years building was being publicly incinerated in front of the very people she sought to impress. But the audio was only the first part of the payload. The LED screen behind Simone suddenly flashed to life. It did not display her company logo. It displayed the high-resolution screen capture I had taken from Kendrick's decrypted laptop. The massive display showed the exact moment the biometric signature was accepted. It showed the routing numbers of Kendrick's offshore shell companies in the Cayman Islands. Then the screen transitioned to the live automated federal alert. Massive glowing red text dominated the display. The words, "Federal Wire Fraud Protocol Initiated," flashed across the screen, followed by a live status feed of the targeted accounts. Target IP addresses logged, proxy servers traced, shell company accounts frozen by federal mandate. The visual evidence was undeniable. It proved that Simone's massive angel investment was nothing more than stolen funds, and it proved that the federal government had already seized every single asset her company was built on. Simone snapped out of her paralyzed state. She spun around and began screaming at the audiovisual technicians in the balcony. "Turn it off! Cut the power to the screen! Cut the audio right now!" Simone shrieked, her voice cracking with pure unhinged desperation. She waved her arms frantically, completely abandoning her polished entrepreneur persona. From the back of the room, one of the technicians held up his hands, shaking his head. They could not turn it off. I had hard-coded a strict lockdown protocol into the playback script. The entire venue system was frozen, trapped in a continuous, unyielding loop of their immense guilt. The reaction from the audience was swift and devastating. The lead investors, the people Simone had aggressively courted to fund her lavish lifestyle, immediately stood up from their tables. They recognized the federal routing codes on the screen. They knew exactly what it meant to be associated with an active wire fraud investigation. They did not ask questions, they just started walking out. A mass exodus began. Chairs scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. Tech journalists pulled out their phones, snapping photos of the federal alerts on the screen and recording Simone's public meltdown on the stage. The launch event was not just a failure. It was a catastrophic, career-ending spectacle that would dominate the financial news cycles by morning. Kendrick, realizing that his entire shadow network was exposed to the authorities and the media, turned and bolted. He shoved past a bewildered waiter, knocking a heavy tray of cocktails to the ground, and sprinted toward the side exit doors. He was desperately trying to flee the venue before the reality of the frozen accounts fully set in. Donovan stood perfectly still in the center aisle, just inches away from me. The charming, wealthy bank manager was entirely gone. He looked completely broken. His eyes darted from the massive screen to his mother gasping for air in the front row, to his sister screaming helplessly on stage, and finally back to me. He looked at my tailored crimson suit, my perfect posture, and the calm, steady smile on my face. The realization finally hit him with the brutal force of a physical blow. I was not a naive, boring accountant. I was an apex predator who had allowed myself to be dragged into their trap just so I could lock the heavy steel doors from the inside. You, Donovan breathed, his voice a ragged, terrified whisper. You planned all of this. I simply let you be exactly who you are, Donovan, I replied, my tone carrying the quiet, lethal weight of absolute victory. You wanted my legacy. Now you get to pay the full price for it. The ballroom was emptying rapidly, leaving only the shattered remnants of their high society facade. The digital trap had executed flawlessly, exposing their true predatory nature to the entire city. But the public humiliation was only the prelude. The real consequences were waiting just outside the doors. The heavy oak doors at the back of the Grand Symphony Hall swung open with a resounding crash. The sound echoed through the nearly empty ballroom, shattering the fragile, terrifying silence that had settled over my husband and his family. The elite investors and tech journalists were already gone, having fled the radioactive fallout of the federal wire fraud alerts still glowing brightly on the massive screen behind the stage. Special Agent Caldwell and Special Agent Pierce marched down the center aisle. They moved with the synchronized, predatory grace of men who hunted white-collar criminals for a living. Sunlight glinted off the gold shields clipped to their belts. They were flanked by half a dozen uniformed federal officers who immediately fanned out to secure every exit in the venue. Kendrick had not made it far. He was shoved back through the side doors by two large officers. They twisted his arms behind his back, forcing him to his knees right at the edge of the stage. He was sweating profusely, his velvet tuxedo jacket torn at the shoulder from his pathetic attempt to resist arrest. His sophisticated crypto investor persona was entirely gone, replaced by the cowardly reality of a cheap grifter facing federal prison. Kendrick, you are under arrest for federal wire fraud, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit financial theft. Agent Caldwell announced, his voice booming with absolute, uncompromising authority. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it because everything you have done tonight is already logged on our servers. Up on the stage, Simone snapped out of her paralyzed state. She looked at her husband kneeling in cuffs, then looked at the federal agents swarming the floor. The golden child, the brilliant tech entrepreneur who had spent her entire life coasting on her parents' money and stealing the rest, finally realized there was no daddy to bail her out of this one. Her startup was dead, her credit was destroyed, and her freedom was evaporating. Get your hands off him! Simone shrieked, stumbling down the stage stairs in her silver designer gown. The heavy fabric caught under her heel, and she nearly pitched forward onto the hardwood floor. She pointed a shaking manicured finger at me. She set us up. She is the criminal. Check her accounts. She is the one you should be arresting. Agent Pierce stepped directly into Simone's path, unbothered by her aristocratic outrage. He pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clink was the sharpest, most satisfying sound I had ever heard. Simone, you are under arrest for corporate conspiracy, extortion, and accessory to federal theft, Agent Pierce stated smoothly, grabbing her wrists and spinning her around. Simone thrashed and kicked, screaming obscenities, completely destroying the last shred of her high society dignity. The glittering diamonds around her neck mocked the cold steel snapping shut around her wrists. Down in the front row, Beatrice let out a sound that I could only describe as a dying animal. The matriarch of the family, the woman who had threatened to destroy my career and called me a cheap peasant, fell to her knees. She crawled toward the agents, tears ruining her expensive makeup, her hands desperately reaching out for her golden children. Do not touch them, Beatrice wailed hysterically, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated agony. We are prominent citizens. We are respected members of this community. You cannot treat us like common criminals. Do you know who I am? I know the mayor. I know the chief of police. Agent Caldwell looked down at the sobbing woman with absolute disgust. We know exactly who you are, ma'am. We have your voice on tape ordering the physical assault of your daughter-in-law. If you do not step back immediately, I will add obstruction of justice to the list of charges currently being drafted against you." Beatrice shrank back, collapsing onto the hardwood floor in a heap of white cashmere and ruined pride. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably as the reality of her total destruction finally sank in. She had lost her fortune, her reputation, and her family in the span of 30 minutes. Donovan had not moved a single muscle. He stood in the center aisle, trapped between the towering screen broadcasting his guilt and the federal agents closing the net around his family. He looked at me, his dark eyes wide with a pathetic, desperate pleading. The charming, wealthy bank manager who had plotted to poison me was gone. He was just a terrified, broken little boy who realized he had played a game he was never smart enough to win. Agent Caldwell stepped up to my husband. He grabbed Donovan's wrists, violently twisting them behind his back, and snapped the handcuffs shut. The cold steel locked tightly over the cuffs of his crisp white dress shirt. "Donovan, you are under arrest for federal theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and aggravated assault," Caldwell recited smoothly, delivering the Miranda rights as he patted down Donovan's pockets for weapons. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Donovan did not fight the agents. He did not scream like his sister or cry like his mother. He just kept his eyes locked on me, his chest heaving with panicked breaths. "Kelsey, please." Donovan choked out a single tear escaping his eye and rolling down his cheek. "I am your husband. I love you. Please tell them to stop. We can fix this. I will give you whatever you want. Just tell them it was a misunderstanding." I walked slowly toward him. My stiletto heels clicked rhythmically against the floor, matching the steady, powerful beating of my own heart. I stopped exactly 2 feet in front of him. I looked at the man who had promised to protect me, the man who had handed me a glass of poison with a smile on his face. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored crimson suit. I pulled out the thick, neatly folded stack of legal documents I had signed in my lawyer's office just a few hours prior. I reached forward and casually slipped the documents directly into the breast pocket of Donovan's suit jacket. "Those are your divorce papers, Donovan," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal calm. "I already sold the house. I liquidated the joint accounts. You are going to federal prison, and you are going to go there with absolutely nothing to your name." Donovan stared at me, his mouth opening and closing without sound, completely paralyzed by the magnitude of his defeat. "You thought I was just a naive, boring little accountant you could use and throw away?" I continued, leaning in slightly, so only he could hear my final verdict. "But you forgot the most important rule of finance, Donovan. The auditor always balances the ledger, and your account is completely bankrupt." I did not wait for his response. I turned my back on my husband, on his wailing mother, and on his screaming, handcuffed sister. I walked straight down the center aisle of the Grand Symphony Hall. The heavy brass doors at the entrance were propped wide open, letting in the cool, rushing wind of the city. I stepped out of the venue and onto the sweeping marble staircase. The crisp night air washed over me, carrying away the suffocating stench of their greed and betrayal. I looked up at the Chicago skyline, the towering skyscrapers glowing brightly against the dark, endless sky. I touched the silver chain resting against my collarbone, knowing my legacy was completely safe behind 3 feet of reinforced steel. I took a deep, cleansing breath. I was entirely alone, incredibly wealthy, and for the first time in my life, I was absolutely flawlessly free. The most profound lesson learned from this story is that true security comes from trusting your own instincts rather than blindly relying on familial titles. Marriage does not automatically guarantee loyalty, and predators can easily hide behind the mask of a loving family. When faced with betrayal, she did not surrender to panic. Instead, she used her intelligence to set firm boundaries and dismantle their toxic control. We must always remember that our inherent worth is never defined by those who exploit us. Please share your experiences and comment below if you have ever set boundaries with toxic family members.